Picture the city at dawn. Marble blushing pink, vendors sliding open shutters, the smell of figs and wet stone. A herald clears his throat on the Knicks, and 100 men do the same, because citizenship here is first a chorus, then a privilege. You want to belong? Excellent. Please produce the following: a Y chromosome, a certificate of freedom, and parents stamped Athenian on both sides like amphorae at the customs house. If any of these are missing, the city smiles, sells you olives, and politely keeps your mouth out of the vote. It's not hypocrisy, it's paperwork, though the paperwork looks suspiciously like a gate. There's a boy in the dem of Alapec. At 18 he shows up with a new beard, 2 proud uncles, and a name that fits both father and grandfather. The local men call them the neighborhood committee, inspect him like a very polite jury. Can he speak without swallowing his tongue? Does he have an oikos that won't collapse under the first tax? Most importantly, were his parents citizens under the law that wants both halves of him to be stamped Athenian? If the answers feel sound and the face looks familiar enough, they vote him in, and a wax tablet somewhere becomes a little heavier. If not, there's an awkward cough and a very long walk home. If you've ever felt your entire future decided by people who still mispronounce your name, congratulations. You understand Okamagia. Citizenship is not a mood, it's a toolkit. With it, you can take an oath with other fresh-shaven ephebes, shoulder a shield that weighs more than your first heartbreak, and discover that courage is mostly rhythm. Left, right, don't drop the bronze. You can speak in the assembly and be heckled by the exact people you'll drink with tonight. You can sit on juries so large they look like accidental festivals and let a water clock discipline your sense of drama. You can be chosen by lot to serve for a year in an office you've never heard of, spend that year discovering ledgers are intensely religious objects, and go home with a headache and a story. Power here isn't a throne, it's a rotating chore chart, and yet the definition of we is razor thin. Take Myron, the medic from Corinth. He pays the resident tax on time, keeps a thriving shop where pots don't crack and promises mostly don't either, and lends money to the neighbor whose courage outran his arithmetic. The city loves Myron's labor and his loans, but not his vote. He's the friend who plans every party and then gets asked to bring ice. He'll serve in the fleet, sweat on the benches, and watch his captain choose the course by raising a citizen's hand. If you're thinking, that seems unfair, good, the Athenians would agree, then remind you that fairness is a local custom with strict membership rules. Behind Myron stands Thraso, who is not behind anyone by choice. Enslaved, imported like unlucky cargo, he sweeps courtyards and memorizes the rhythm of other people's lives. Sometimes he becomes the trusted steward, keeper of keys and calendars. Sometimes he becomes a line item. The city doesn't call him a citizen or a person in the political sense. It calls him property with potential. There are routes out: manumission papers, a careful patron, a little silver saved 1 coin at a time. But every route has a lock, and every lock a landlord. If freedom is a ladder, the first rung is made of someone else's decision. Then there's Callisto, born in Athens, to Athenian parents, married with a dowry that could buy a small fishing fleet. She will manage servants, stretch grain, negotiate with weather and stubborn children, and turn a household into a humming machine that produces order on weekdays and miracles on feast days. The law will call her citizen woman, which is like calling a musician audience adjacent. She won't vote, she won't speak in court. She will be the quiet engine that keeps voting men fed and lawful. If power is deciding who talks and who listens, she is conscripted into listening with style. The gods, impressively, still take her prayers at full value. You might think, why this gatekeeping? The official answer: to protect the city's lineage, its land, its law, its story about itself. The unofficial answer: people trust what they can count, and they count what they can label. Hence the fetish for demes and phratries, those civic families that notarize belonging with sacrifices and awkward dinners. A boy becomes a man by being enrolled and by surviving older cousins. A man becomes a citizen by being counted and by returning alive from work he didn't choose. Somewhere between a vote and a funeral, he understands that Athenian is less a birthright than a recurring subscription with occasional audits. Citizenship also comes with invoices disguised as honors. Liturgies, they're called, fund a chorus, sponsor a ship, pay for a festival that will outlast your popularity but not your expense account. The rich swear they are delighted, then invent tax-deductible mythologies about generosity. If you're chosen to finance a trireme, you discover 2 universal truths. Oarsmen eat twice as much as you budgeted, and gratitude is not a maritime resource. Refuse, and a courtroom will ask your neighbors whether your purse is heavier than your public spirit. There are cities where wealth buys silence. Athens prefers to buy stage time. The gate has its loopholes, of course. In war, the city redefines we at the speed of fear. Medics become indispensable. Freedmen become suddenly visible. Even slaves may be promised a horizon if they pull hard enough on an oar. Afterward, the gate closes again with that practiced civic smile, and speeches about purity return like swallows. Hypocrisy? Perhaps. or just the nervous system of a place that believes in rules and remembers hunger. Athens is not consistent, it is continuous. The strangest part may be the ceremony of names. Citizens carry their father's name and their deme like a passport stamped on the tongue. Nicias, son of Archestratos of Alopeke. It's both a biography and a leash. The city wants to know where to find you if you promise a horse and deliver a donkey. It also wants to know who to praise if your speech moves stones to compassion. A metic will be Myron the Corinthian, which is beautiful and permanent in the wrong way. An enslaved man will be Thraso, belonging to so-and-so, which is ugly and accurate in the worst way. Language here is not just description, it is jurisdiction. And though the rules are stiff, the street is flexible. The woman who cannot vote can still choose which vendor sells to her household and which rumor lands on a magistrate's table. The metic who cannot speak in the assembly can make sure half the assembly owes him small favors. The slave who cannot sign a contract can remember who cheated whom and at what time of day. Politics officially happens on the hill. Unofficially, it happens at the well, the workshop, the doorway where people think they're only passing through. If the city is a machine for deciding, the oil is poured in alleys. Now imagine the assembly in full voice. A young citizen climbs the bema for the first time, palm, slick, heart-punching time like a drummer with opinions. He looks over the sea of faces and realizes two things at once. These men will judge him without mercy, and they will protect his right to fail. That is the faith at the center of the gate, that guarded participation is better than universal apathy. Whether that faith is wisdom or fear depends on who's listening from the shadows, someone counting coins, someone counting hours, someone whose work makes this noise possible and whose name isn't on the tablet. The herald lifts his staff, the water clock begins to drip, the city inhales, and somewhere in a quiet courtyard a woman presses a finger to her lips, because not every decision is made where the shouting is loudest. At dawn the house wakes like a stage crew, embers coaxed back to life, water lifted from the cistern, a soft percussion of pestle and spindle. She is already up. Not Athenian in the way the assembly means it, but Athenian in the way the city survives. Hands that measure grain with the memory of last winter, eyes that judge a cloud for honesty, feet that know which step creaks when someone comes home late. The law calls her a citizen woman, which is like calling the Acropolis a hill with ambitions. She does not vote, she calibrates. She does not plead cases. She prevents them by keeping the household from tripping over its own hunger. Her life began with signatures she never wrote. A father, the Kyrios, negotiated a dowry heavy enough to prove seriousness and light enough to carry without resentment. Marriage arrived as a transaction with rituals, a torch-lit procession, bread shared, a bed sprinkled with the plausible hopes of everyone present. She may be 14, he may be twice that. If this sounds uncomfortable, it often was, which is why neighbors invented the social technology of grandmothers. A grandmother can fold awkwardness into a recipe faster than a philosopher can define virtue. The dowry follows her like a well-behaved shadow. It is hers and not hers, legally attached, practically supervised. If the marriage frays, she takes it back. If he squanders it, his reputation bleeds in public. The irony writes itself. The one person who cannot stand in court is the structural beam that keeps two houses from collapsing into scandal. The city will tell you it protects her by keeping her inside. Inside what exactly? Inside the gynaikaion, the women's quarters, a room that is less prison than production line, weaving that clothes a family and sometimes a festival, accounts that remember debts husbands forget, jars labeled with a strictness that could audit a temple. Weaving is not a hobby, it is a constitution. Each thread holds the family in one piece and the polis in decent garments. On good years her hands move beyond the house. The great Panathenaic peplos for Athena grows on communal looms, its mythic scenes marching stitch by stitch into public memory. People later will say Athenian women were hidden. They were also stitched into everything. The simplest test is laundry day. If you can see clean tunics walking through town, you can see her work walking ahead of them. Religion opens doors that politics closes. She carries a basket in procession, a kinephoros, and the city briefly turns toward her with ceremony instead of instruction. At the Thesmophoria, she disappears into a women-only festival whose rules make men suddenly very interested in agriculture. They will joke about piglets and fertility, and pretend not to notice that the future of the harvest just consulted the future of the household and decided on both. Priestesses hold real budgets and sacred keys. When a goddess wants reliable management, she hires locally. Health is the quiet antagonist. Childbirth is a cliff no man will ever climb, yet he writes the property laws at the bottom. Midwives do the careful magic, warming oil, listening to breath, bargaining with pain like diplomats with better bedside manners. Amulets swing over cradles, tiny hands are tied with red thread, and a god with clinical discretion is asked to keep an eye on fevers. If a son arrives, the father lifts him from the ground to acknowledge him. If he does not lift, a neighbor's door or the dump may learn a new name for sorrow. The city speaks sternly of lineage and then relies on women to turn lineage into a living person with socks. Her legal voice is a ventriloquist act. A guardian speaks in court. She speaks through influence. The grocer who cheats her will find that her husband's patience has mysteriously gone missing. The maid who knows too much will suddenly know a little more, and be loyal for it. She cannot vote, but she can choose which merchant becomes comfortable and which rumor becomes policy by accident. If politics is a loud river on the Nix, the household is the network of irrigation ditches that decides which fields actually grow. Sometimes the law surprises itself. There is the epikleros, the heiress whose father dies without sons. She is not wealth, she is a bridge. The closest male relative marries her, so the property stays with the clan. It is tidy on papyrus and untidy in kitchens. She may prefer a different cousin or none. The city shrugs. Families are puzzles. Finish the picture. Meanwhile, she negotiates micro-freedoms. Who mills the grain? What gets sold? Which servant gets the winter cloak? And those tiny decisions turn into winter itself or something kinder. Adultery laws patrol the borders of male pride with an enthusiasm that would impress border guards. If a husband catches a seducer in the act, the law winks, do what you must. If he catches his own foolishness, well, there's the market of apologies and fines. She learns the choreography of caution, door bolts, discreet allies, a social horizon that reduces scandal like good cooking reduces a sauce. It's not that she is fragile, it's that reputation is the family's second dowry. Men guard it with swords, women guard it with calendars. Work does not end at the threshold. Poorer women hawk vegetables and fish, brew, weave for hire, carry water in clay that bites the palm. Medic women run shops cleverer than their husbands and pay taxes for the privilege of being overlooked. A few, rare and loud in the sources, are learned companions in symposia, sharp with poetry and politics, because the city outsourced wit to where it wouldn't have to admit it. But the statistical majority is this: a woman whose ledger is her head and whose credit line is the trust she has accrued by never missing a morning. The body keeps minutes the law ignores. She tracks her cycle by moon and mood, knows which herbs mean not today and which teas mean please sleep, navigates illnesses that don't get monuments, mastitis, miscarriages, the long gray of recovery that nobody writes hymns for. She perfects the art of triage, which worry to feed, which to starve, which to domesticate with a joke. The joke is often about men. Men tell it too, pretending they are the target so they can remain the audience. At night, the house, with its cheap brilliance, becomes a ship. The lamp a heartbeat, the courtyard a quiet sea. She checks the latches, lays out wool for the morning, moves the jar so the child won't trip. Somewhere outside, the city debates justice, and here she performs it, allocating bread and mercy with an accuracy that would embarrass auditors. People say women live inside, as if the inside were small. The inside includes hunger, fever, sleep, and the way the future fits in a crib without waking the dog. If you want a simple judgment, oppressor, victim, angel, ghost, you will not find it here. You will find constraint heavy as bronze and agency nimble as a cat on a wall. You will find a person who cannot be quoted in the assembly shaping the assembly's breakfast, and therefore its temper, and therefore its law. You will find a city terrified of chaos, inventing a private order, and assigning it, without acknowledgement, to the half of itself that cannot stand up and say I. And you will find, as dawn returns and sandals scuff the street, that this arrangement is not a secret. It's a habit. Habits can change. They usually don't, until someone asks why the room everyone lives in is the room no one counts. Somewhere, a door opens, sandals thump down steps, and the courtyard fills with light that looks suspiciously like an argument getting ready to dress. Start with a headache and a question. The headache comes from cheap wine and cheaper sleep. The question arrives anyway, perfectly sober. What is the good life, and where does it hide when your neighbor's cough sounds like a prophecy? In Athens, the answer is never later. Philosophy happens in the street, in the stoa's shade, on a stone that has seen more minds than sandals. You don't need a library card. You need curiosity, time between errands, and a tolerance for men who answer one question with three more. The city makes thinking a public sport, with hecklers, snacks, and the constant risk that a poet will ambush you with better phrasing. A boy named Damon grows up in a world where fevers travel faster than mail, and the gods accept first fruits, but not returns. He hears Heraclitus quoted at the fountain, "No man steps in the same river twice," and realizes you also don't step in the same body twice. Cells of the word cells haven't been invented yet, but change stares from the mirror every morning. Another man counters with Parmenides. Change is an illusion. Being is one. Relax. Damon looks at his molar, which is definitely looser than yesterday, and decides logic is excellent until bread runs out. The pre-Socratics are Athens's morning weather. Some say fire, some say water. A few say number, and everyone is damp, lit, or counting. Socrates arrives like a corrective lens. Barefoot, snub-nosed, built like a useful statue, he asks for definitions as if truth were a misplaced sandal. What is courage? You answer, charging into battle. He tilts his head. And the general who retreats to fight tomorrow? You try again. He asks again. Suddenly you're the one being examined, and the only way out is honesty without decorations. The trick is that he won't leave the marketplace. He wants philosophy to compete with fishmongers and olive sellers and still be worth stopping for. It usually is, until the hemlock menu appears. No dish of reason protects you from politics seasoned with fear. Between dialogues, life keeps its own syllabus. Diarrhea can decide your metaphysics. If the soul is immortal, great, you might meet your ancestors. If it isn't, please pass the clean water. Hippocratic doctors tell you disease has causes, not opinions. Priests tell you gods have opinions and can cause things. Most people hedge their bets with both. The philosophers refine the hedge. Epicurus later will whisper that pleasure means bread, friendship, and a calm gut. The Stoics will argue for virtue, the only thing death can't confiscate. The Cynics will propose freedom by subtraction and spend afternoons not wanting things in public. Damon tries each for a week, like sandals, and keeps whichever doesn't blister. A curious fact about wisdom, it ages unpredictably. Our bright minds rarely grow old. That's not a slogan. It's a plague statistic. The average lifespan is a misleading number chained to infant mortality, but luck remains the stern chaperone of every plan. A fever ignores syllogisms. A cut resents your ontology. A cough can out-argue a speech. No wonder ethics becomes emergency training. Temperance isn't prudishness. It's a strategy to live through markets that sometimes sell tainted fish with conviction. Courage isn't chest-beating. It's staying in the city when leaving would make you a coward with excellent lungs. Justice isn't a statue. It's paying your miller before his daughter's dowry collapses. Plato builds a gym for souls. Dialogues as exercise, definitions as weights, myths as the cool down when logic has raised your heart rate too far. He insists the visible world is a shadow, which is marginally comforting if your roof leaks, but less helpful if your roof actually leaks. Still, the idea that there is a form of the good, pure, inviolate, gives Damon a way to value clean water even when the bucket is cracked. Aristotle, with pockets full of notebooks, wanders the Lyceum compiling the world like an honest tax collector. Animals, constitutions, causes, how to be happy without lying to yourself. He teaches that virtue is a habit steered by reason. Damon hears practice decency every day, which is handier than infinity. Between lessons, bodies protest. A sprain from carrying amphorae, a rash from the bathhouse, a sore throat that decides it is a vocation. Philosophy adapts by coming down from the clouds into the kitchen. What is moderation? It's 2 cups of watered wine when a third turns courage into karaoke. What is friendship? It's someone who visits with soup when the fever bans metaphysics. What is the soul? Perhaps the name we give to the part of us that keeps an appointment even when the streets are full of funerals. Big words get measured in small acts or they don't survive the week. Athens practices an odd honesty. It will host a public disputation about the nature of justice and then sell you a charm at the next stall because your child's cough sounds persuasive. You might mock that until you need both. Reason checks panic, ritual checks loneliness. The wisest people Damon meets keep a foot in each boat and row in the same direction. They quote a line about fate and still boil the water. They admit that fortune can be vicious and still lay out the cloak so sleep finds the body halfway. There's comedy in this seriousness. A philosopher declares that death is nothing to us. An old woman passing by mutters that it will be something to his mother. A young man writes a treatise on desire and then falls in love with the wrong person right on schedule. A sophist sells a course on winning any argument. His students leave convinced they were right to pay. Athens lets them all perform because thought needs friction to spark. You don't get better ideas by hiding them from tomatoes. Underneath the talk lies a blunt arithmetic. Time is rented. The plague teaches it in red ink. Damon learns to organize his thinking like a well-run pantry. Arguments should be durable and easy to reach. Beliefs should be labeled with the date you last tested them. Hope should be stored high, away from damp. He discovers that kindness is both virtue and strategy, because someday someone will carry you and it helps if you gave them a reason earlier. He also learns a darker lesson. Cleverness without care is just a sharper knife. So why keep asking questions when the body can veto any answer? Because thinking is how you refuse to be only a patient. Because a city that debates the meaning of justice will eventually notice injustice that has been standing politely in the doorway. Because a mind that practices distinguishing appearance from truth might someday distinguish rumor from plague advice. Because sometimes laughter lands where fear was, and that's as medicinal as vinegar. And because, against the statistics, some people do live long enough to become libraries with sandals. One afternoon, Damon sits by the palestra and watches boys oil their shoulders, trade insults, and practice falls that won't break a neck. A philosopher nearby argues that the good life is balance. Not too much pain, not too much pleasure, the soul tuned like a lyre. Damon notices the trainer's hand. Steady, economical, adjusting a stance so tendons won't fail later. Perhaps balance is learned in the body first, then smuggled into ethics. The sun slides, the air smells like olive leaves and sweat. Someone spits for grip and then laughs at the superstition they refuse to abandon. Thinking, it turns out, is happiest when it can lean on muscle, and nothing checks a grand theory faster than a slippery stone under a bare foot. The gymnasium announces itself by smell before you see the columns: warm olive oil, clean dust, a note of bronze, a faint anxiety that only bodies about to compare themselves can produce. Gymnos means naked, but it really means honest. Clothing hides laziness. Bare skin tells the truth in high definition. You step under the colonnade, and the first tool thrust into your hand is not a discus, but a little oil flask. The second is a strigil, a bronze crescent for scraping off sweat, sand, and the polite lies you told yourself about your fitness. Anyone can philosophize about virtue. Try doing it while a man with calves like Doric columns explains your posture to gravity. The ritual is choreography more than glamour. Oil to loosen and protect, dust to grip, movement until each joint stops making medieval noises. Strigil to skim the day's evidence into a tidy curl called gloios. Yes, they collect it. Yes, some people swear by it as medicine. No, the sales pitch does not come with a refund. A trainer jokes that everything in Athens is recycled into something: arguments, amphorae, even sweat. And it's hard to disagree when you watch a boy trade a perfect shoulder throw for a little pot of someone else's shine. The city has a genius for turning leftovers into theories. The palestra, the wrestling court, is where politeness and physics negotiate. Sand gives, then instructs. A patotribes counts in elbows and hips, not numbers. You learn an alphabet without letters. The hand that finds a wrist, the foot that draws a circle you never step out of, the breath that waits to exhale until the opponent forgets he's holding it. Every fall is a footnote your body writes for future reference. The alliptes, the Euler Masseur, is the department of corrections. Thumb under scapula, palm along the ache you didn't admit. A lecture in the universal language of pressure. In a world where pain can mean fever tomorrow, prevention is a daily sport that looks suspiciously like vanity. Equipment has philosophers' names before the philosophers think to borrow them. Halteres, those hand weights for long jumpers, make you understand momentum as a morality tale. How you launch decides how you land. The discus teaches humility in circles. It loves the thrower, who remembers wind as a voter. The javelin is marriage counseling between arm and aim. When they get along, distance happens. A korikos, punching sack, swings back with a memory sharper than yours. Nothing in this courtyard is ornamental. Each object is a truth machine calibrated by bruises. Nudity is an exhibition. It's standardization. Muscles are units of measurement. Scars annotate experience. Beauty is not a statue's stillness, but symmetry that works under pressure. A stomach that holds form while twisting, a back that keeps promises when asked rudely, calves that speak in iambic pentameter when running uphill. The ideal here is kalokagathia, beautiful and good, an ambitious hyphen that tries to weld aesthetics to ethics. Does it always succeed? Of course not. The city forgives a lot in the beautiful. The sand forgives nothing in the foolish. Spitting, improbably, has footnotes. A quick spit into the dust before a lift or grip is part superstition, part practical science. Moisture catches grit, grit catches palm, palm catches reality. Call it the cheapest chalk in the ancient world. Philosophers dislike it until they slip. Then they endorse it with the same fervor they reserved for forms and causes. There is something refreshing about a practice that makes equal skeptics of poets and wrestlers in a single inelegant gesture. Philosophy meets empiricism. At the moment the stone wins, infections hover like nosy critics. Warm shared spaces are generous with fungi and skin complaints. The strigil, if you pass it without a rinse, can spread more than camaraderie. Trainers enforce small rituals like laws: rinse the blade, dry the bench, don't pretend your ringworm is a birthmark. Vinegar is surgeon and sermon. It stings first and then explains its reasoning. The Hippocratic visitor nods approvingly at airflow and shade. He frowns at communal towels with the moral gravity of a tragedian. It turns out the best argument against disease is the clean habit, a fact that ages better than most theories. The soundtrack is not all grunts. Laughter erupts whenever a leap with halteres ends in an elegant belly flop. A chorus of sympathy meets the discus that chooses to be a plate. Boys trade insults of great poetic poverty and perfect timing. Someone quotes a line about courage. Someone else replies that courage is returning tomorrow after today's lesson in gravity. The humor is strategic. You hit sandpaper's pride into something grip can hold. You cannot stay ridiculous and remain fragile. The gymnasium insists you choose. Watch long enough, and you'll notice teaching sneaking around disguised as touch. A hand on a rib teaches breath control. 2 fingers on a wrist teach economy. A palm on the lower back teaches alignment more convincingly than any speech about virtue. A city obsessed with rhetoric trusts hands here more than mouths. You learn that a stance is a thesis you test until you stop falling. You learn that rhythm conserves strength and that the dramatic gesture is the enemy of endurance. The critique is instantaneous and not personal. Gravity has no favorites. The day has its arc. Early light favors runners, who stitch the courtyard into a soft rectangle of footprints. Mid-morning belongs to jumpers and throwers. elegant in their brief parabolas. Heat shifts the crowd to shade and slow strength work, little disciplined rebellions against later stiffness. Towards sunset, the wrestlers return, all discipline and grime and the kind of smiles that only happen when a skill clicks into place. The strigil sings more then, drawing maps on skin, and little piles of scraped-off day wait to be jarred, sold, or thrown away depending on your religion about residue. Women do not train here, officially. Bodies wear rules like cloaks. But rumor knows spaces outside rules. Private courtyards, island towns, festivals where contests are narrower and inspectors less zealous. Health is more persuasive than policy, and the body is a stubborn lobbyist. Somewhere, a girl practices a run between jars while pretending to fetch water. Somewhere, a mother shows a daughter how to lift without asking her spine to pay interest. The city's public face may be bronze, its private muscle flexes in linen. Occasionally, theory ambles in for a workout. A philosopher proposes that the best life is balanced like a well-tuned lyre. The trainer replies by adjusting a stance until the metaphor is legible to joints. Another insists that the soul is immortal. A sprain demonstrates that the ankle is not. They agree that repetition edits character. Reps are ethics in miniature. Do a thing correctly often enough, and you become the kind of person who does it correctly. On the track, in the market, on the witness stand. The bath is not luxury, but punctuation. First, strigil again, then cold water that forgives and remembers, sometimes a scrape with pumice over stubborn truths, finally oil like a sentence that knows how to end. You step away lighter, not because your problems dissolve, but because their grip did. Clean is not the opposite of dirty, it's the opposite of distracted. People emerge, smelling faintly of resin and relief, which is to say, prepared to be seen without apologizing for the day. Stand on the threshold, and you can hear thirst gathering opinions, mouths chalked with dust, throats arguing for policy change, hands already reaching for cups. The courtyard teaches one last lesson the philosophers love. Bodies are Democrats. They vote early and often, and they always break ties in favor of the elemental. Somewhere a crater waits with its compromise, wine tempered by water, so talk stays useful, laughter stays civil, and tomorrow's training isn't canceled by tonight's enthusiasm. The oiled light fades, the air cools, and the first cup lifts. Not as an escape from discipline, but as part of it, the kind that keeps a city lively without letting it burn. Begin with a thirst shaped like noon. The sun has arguments with your skull, the dust votes for annexation, and the well is a mirror that remembers every hand. You lower the bucket and know a secret everyone in the city knows. Water is innocent only in songs. Wells are civic gossip, cleaner after rain, touchy after festivals, prone to the moods of roofs and neighbors. A smart household treats a cup like a question. You sniff, you look, you hesitate. Then you do the most Athenian thing imaginable. You add wine. The mixing bowl, the crater, sits like a small republic on 3 legs. Into it go measures that are half math, half diplomacy. Akratos, wine without water, is for barbarians, funeral mistakes, and a very short evening. A ratio of 1 to 2 makes a conversation brave. 1 to 3 makes it wise. 1 to 4 makes it last until the stars take attendance. The symposiarch, chairman of the mixture and therefore of the mood, decides. He watches faces, the heat, the number of men who arrived angrier than they admit, and he pours a policy. It is public health with good manners. Why mix it all? Start with microbes you don't know yet by name. Cisterns collect not only rain, but also the biographies of pigeons. Clay pipes get ideas. Buckets remember hands. Wine has a temperate cruelty to it. It discourages what the eye can't see and the stomach can't negotiate. It also dignifies water past its prime. Add pine resin, the ancestor of Retsina, because amphorae are lined with it, and because medicine sometimes needs a forest to clear its throat. It tastes like an argument you learn to love. There's a choreography to doing it right. A slave brings the water in a hydria that shows on her shoulder like a promise. Another tilts the oinocho, the wine jug, so the crater receives, without splashing the floor into a lawsuit. The kylix, the shallow wide cup, spreads the aroma thin and the conversation wide. Men recline, which sounds decadent until you try to keep a complicated cup level while laughing at a poet. The first libation is for the gods, which is also for the floor and the ants. The second is for heroes. The third is for friendship. The fourth is for singing. The fifth, if reached, is for mistakes and therefore rarely official. A funny truth. Moderation is less a virtue than a technology. Water slows wine's ambition. Wine civilizes water's biography. Together they create an evening that runs on rhythm instead of velocity. The Greeks invent proportion not only in sculpture but in thirst. They know that a city's worst speeches are given by men who drank like invaders. In fact, a reliable insult is to call someone Acrates, undisciplined, because his cup forgot he's mortal. Good hosts don't avoid pleasure. They meter it. The taste of the city changes with the source. Agora, water, has opinions. Fountain house water is shy and colder. Rural wells are frank and sometimes pastoral in ways the stomach regrets. Sailors swear by diluted wine at sea, not because they are gourmets, but because boats are laboratories for consequences. On the benches of a trireme, discipline begins with the crater. Equal shares, honest dilution, no heroics before noon. You want a navy? Start with a recipe. Children drink differently, which is to say, they drink what mothers trust. Thin wine water for fevers, don't tell the doctors. Barley water for days that require patience. Honeyed water for negotiating naps. Vinegar has a second life as Posca, a soldier's drink, water sharpened so it stops sulking in hot weather. Vinegar also audits cups, knives, and surfaces, stinging long enough to make a point. If you think this is unromantic, you are right. It also keeps people from dying of preventable poetry. The crater becomes a classroom as the night warms. Ratio turns into rhetoric. How much story? How much evidence? How much silence? A good symposiarch anticipates the third cup's boldness and pads it with the fourth cup's mercy. He redirects the man who always quotes Homer at the exact moment women should be paid and children should be fed. He waters down insults into jokes and waters up jokes into recognitions. Somewhere between cup 2 and cup 3, courage realizes it is happier as candor. Not all wine is equal, and Athens knows the map by palate. Chion is elegant. Thasian is practical. Local Attic, if kept well, is loyal and slightly opinionated. Amphorae wear stamps like passports. Merchants wear reputations like anklets that jingle when they lie. Fraud meets its match in public mixing. If your wine cannot survive water, your name will not survive market day. The agoranomoi, the market inspectors, love craters because they are truth serum with handles. Hygiene sneaks in as etiquette. Rinse the kylix between drinkers. Don't let the strigil of the gymnasium moonlight as a ladle. Don't drink from a cup that smells like yesterday's bragging. Boil suspect water before it meets an expensive vintage. Let the steam do the oratory. Store amphorae in cool shade. Give the resin time to be helpful rather than bossy. In plainer houses, clay mugs live next to vinegar and sun. In grander ones, silver makes an entrance and leaves fingerprints. Either way, the rule holds. The cleaner the vessel, the kinder the morning. There's philosophy floating in the mix. Temperance, Sophrosyn, isn't refusal. It's choosing the strength that keeps the evening beautiful and the memory useful. Friendship is proofed at the crater. Who refills whom? Who times a story so the room breathes together? Who switches to water when another man's grief finally speaks? Justice appears when the best wine makes the longest round. If the gods began as weather, they end the night as proportion. Of course, someone will brag about drinking straight from the amphora. He is the same man who races torches against the wind and loses eyebrows. Comedy keeps him employed. Tragedy keeps the rest alert. In plague years, the crater becomes stricter and the jokes darker. In harvest years, cups shine like opinions and even the floor forgives. The habit persists because it works. Mix and you get tomorrow. The last thing to say is a warning disguised as courtesy. If a stranger refuses to mix, he announces war on the room. If a host waters to cruelty, he announces thrift dressed as virtue. The art is the middle where conversation holds and nobody gets clever enough to break furniture. When the crater is finally tilted to show its quiet clay and the lamp smoke draws its small line on the roof, men stand and discover their feet still tell the truth. Outside, the city's other machine is already gathering. Stones, ballots, fragile certainties. And it will want mouths steady and eyes awake. Cups go down, sandals find straps. And the taste left on the tongue is not wine or water, but the discipline of mixture, which, soon enough, will be asked of arguments. Begin with a hill and a habit. The hill is the nix, scarred with footprints and opinions. The habit is raising a hand when a herald shouts, "Who wishes to speak?" Democracy here is not an app. It's a workout. You climb. You squint into the attic glare. You listen to a fisherman insult a general with alarming grammatical accuracy. And then you vote by show of hands, the original user interface. It feels gloriously messy until you notice who isn't climbing. Women? At home, balancing ledgers that keep these speeches fed. Medics? In shops, bankrolling sales they don't get to direct. Enslaved people? Everywhere, invisibly. Count the bodies that count the votes, and you get maybe 1 in 10. Call it a miracle. Call it a club with incredible minutes. The club has rules and furniture. Cleisthenes shuffled the citizen body into 10 tribes like a deck of cards. Demes from city, coast, and inland mixed so cousins wouldn't run the state like a family business. 500 men, 50 from each tribe, sit on the council for a year, drafting decrees, checking accounts, discovering that paperwork is the true test of courage. A new 50 take the chair each month, because power here expires faster than yesterday's fish. If you think rotation is chaos, spend a week with one man in charge. You'll come begging for a lottery. Ah yes, the lottery. Offices are filled not by handshakes, but by stones. The Clarotarian, a slab riddled with slots, eats bronze identity tickets and, using a simple device of colored balls, decides who gets a desk, a headache, and the right to be yelled at politely. It's governance by bingo. The cosmos is HR. Not the generals, those you elect because you prefer your war managed by competence rather than luck. Everyone else? Draw lots, then draw breath. Then draw the line at corruption, because your neighbors will carve your name into comedy if you try anything clever. Pay arrives like a quiet revolution. Jury service gets a daily stipend, so not only the rich can sit through 6 hours of rhetoric and personal attacks, ancient Twitter, but with togas and a water clock. The assembly eventually pays a small attendance fee too, because participation loses fans when harvests come due. You still need time and a healthy body, but now poorer citizens can afford to nod at arguments instead of nodding off from hunger. Cynics will say this is bribery. Idealists will call it access. Athenians will shrug and note that virtue is easier to practice when your children ate breakfast. The courts are the real amphitheater of power. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of jurors, chosen by lot that morning, packed onto benches that collectively creak like a moral fable. No judges in wigs. The people are both gavel and gaze. Each side speaks until the clepsydra, water clock, says stop. If you ramble, you literally run out of time. If your argument leaks, everyone can hear it. Evidence means witnesses, contracts, and the occasional moral panic. Enslaved witnesses are tortured to make them reliable, a policy so confident you can smell the fear on it. Verdicts are final, and applause is not. The assembly is theater with consequences. A demagogue warms up the crowd with numbers that sound round enough to be true. A veteran clears his throat and names the wind like an old friend. A 19-year-old shakes on the bema and discovers his voice belongs to his lungs, not his uncle. You vote by raising hands. The count is approximate. The mood is not. Decrees pass. Ships get funded. Allies get offended. Poets sharpen their knives. A handy legal check, graph paranomon, lets any citizen sue to overturn a decree as illegal, which means a man can make a law at breakfast and defend it in court by lunchtime. It's exhausting. It's also how accountability learns to jog. Money bleeds into honor through liturgies, civic sponsorships that sound noble and invoiced like nightmares. Wealthy citizens underwrite choruses, torch races, and, when the sea calls rude names, a trireme with 200 hungry opinions. Try fitting a budget around oarsmen who eat like metaphors. If you duck the duty, a rival can challenge you to exchange estates on the spot, antidosis, calling your bluff with property deeds. Nothing clarifies patriotism like the sudden possibility of moving into someone else's mortgage. Ostracism is the city's yearly pressure valve. Write a name on a potsherd, heap 10,000 of them, and the winner gets an all-expenses-paid exile for 10 years. No hard feelings. It's banishment as preemptive damage control. Less, you did wrong, more, you're too large. Is it fair? Rarely. Does it work? Sometimes in the way opening a window works. The air changes. Nobody dies. People complain. The broken pottery remains, a confetti of suspicion in the archaeological record. For all its swagger, the system knows its blind spots. It relies on public space, walkable distances, audibility, the discipline to mix wine with water so debates end in policy rather than fistfights. It relies on shared measures and inspected weights because fair markets produce calmer voters. It relies on records carved in stone because parchment burns and memory flatters. It relies, always, on the unpaid labor of those barred from the vote, meals cooked, garments woven, children quieted, so the polis can pretend reason floats free of logistics. The joke writes itself. The freest speech in Greece begins after someone else has done the dishes. And yet, when it works, it is a machine for making ordinary men larger than themselves. A farmer learns strategic geography by listening to sailors. A mason learns foreign policy by pricing timber. A potter learns the difference between glory and logistics by funding a chorus and losing money beautifully. You can see character forming in civic fiber. The habit of showing up, the humility of losing in public, the suspicious joy of being wrong and not dying. Athens is not a utopia. It is a habit you renew by climbing a hill and lending your throat. Of course, the bill comes due. War eats votes for breakfast. Empire arrives with invoices disguised as alliances. Plague takes the microphone without asking, and the assembly's brave acoustics turn into a cough that edits the agenda. When fear makes fast friends with charisma, demagogues multiply like rumors. The people who can't climb the hill still carry its outcomes home. The herald raises his staff. The hands rise. The city chooses. And somewhere in a crowded port, a man checks the lashings on a ship that will turn today's eloquence into tomorrow's weather. Morning on the muster field does not sound like glory. It sounds like leather complaining, bronze clearing its throat, and a lot of men pretending their sandals never bite. The shield goes on first because it is the heaviest promise you make all day. It is not a badge. It is a door you carry, big enough to hide a second thought and wide enough to shelter the ribs of the man to your left. If you want a definition of citizenship that doesn't fit on a stone, try this. Your shield protects your neighbor. His protects you. Both protect the story you tell yourself about courage. Forgetting that story is how people get famous in the wrong way. A hoplite's kit is less fashion than physics. The helmet limits hearing. The cuirass limits vanity. The greaves make you walk like someone who suddenly respects stairs. The spear is long enough to be a plan and short enough to force eye contact. In the line, knees touch, shields overlap, and the front rank's breath becomes a metronome. Heroism is mostly choreography you practice until it looks natural. The first crush of shields is not like the theater. It is like a door closing and you are on the hinge. If the line holds, history later calls you disciplined. If it wavers, history calls you interesting. Nothing in this formation is individual after the third heartbeat. You advance to flute music because rhythm is cheaper than panic and has better results. The ground is your second enemy. Stone stub, dust blinds, ruts grab a sandal strap at exactly the moment you need your feet to remember their job. Men who wax eloquent about honor will make intimate treaties with potholes as soon as bronze meets bone. The spear thrust is a sentence with one verb. The shield shove is punctuation. The shouted name of a friend who just disappeared is the footnote nobody wants to read. The phalanx wins by boring the enemy faster than it bores you. That is not a poetic truth, but it is faithful. After the first clash, everything shrinks to grip, stance, and the radius of your breath. You are a small moving wall with a point on it. The brilliant ideas belong to the generals, but your calf muscle vetoes anything that requires more heroism than oxygen. If the opposing line breaks, pursuit begins, short, savage, loud, and then the part no one wants in statues. Collecting wounded, counting dead, deciding how much mercy the day can afford before sunset. Infections are opportunists. The cut that looked like a souvenir turns rude by evening. Vinegar argues with it, wine negotiates, honey seals treaties. Bandages or whatever fabric lost the political fight with a knife. There are men who know how to set bones and men who claim to. Both are popular. You learn a new respect for shade, water that doesn't lie, and sleep that arrives before nightmares do. Victory feasts will be postponed 5 minutes while someone boils a blade. Before you ever reach the field, logistics holds your future by the throat. Bread, salt, onions, dried figs, small food that survives being marched upon. Water skins decide whether courage travels or sulks. A competent quartermaster is worth 10 speeches. A broken cartwheel can end a campaign before it begins. The army steps off at dawn because heat negotiates poorly after noon. Camp follows geometry. Latrines downhill and downwind, so the gods are not asked to forgive what a ditch could have prevented. War may be fate, but dysentery is public policy. Not every fight is on land. The trireme looks delicate at the key, all long ribs and glittering beak, but underway she is a machine that eats coordination for breakfast. 3 tiers of oars mean 3 tiers of backs, and the stroke master's drum is the city's second heartbeat. You do not have to love your neighbor to match him, only to trust that he will pull when it hurts. A ram at the bow promises satisfaction at the cost of physics. Strike cleanly and shear a spine of planks. Strike badly and learn how fast the sea judges. Sailors swear that diluted wine is a divine invention. On a ship, microbes are mutineers. Training is honesty rehearsed. The field behind the city holds little dramas of push and fall, spear and step, until instinct is no longer embarrassed by thought. Men learn how to run in bronze without becoming a proverb, how to pivot without donating a knee to ideology, how to survive the shuffle when a friend's foot finds the back of your ankle. Humor thrives here because it is the only antidote to collective terror. If you must be a hero, one trainer says, be a hero at the right time. The rest of the time, be a metronome. Courage has castes. There's the hot courage that leaps, useful in plays and occasionally in ambushes. The cool courage that keeps the line straight even when a trumpet lies. The stubborn courage that refuses to argue with distance. The city praises all 3, but it survives on the last 2. A spear is not a solo instrument. The man who breaks ranks to chase personal glory will be the reason someone else's wife learns the exact price of heroism in barley. Tragedy rarely begins with an enemy. It begins with a miscalculation told in the key of I. War is also paperwork with a sword leaning against it. Levies called, exemptions argued, fines exacted for late arrivals who had excellent reasons. Sick child, bad harvest, philosophy exam. The rich provide horses or ships and call it honor. The poor provide bodies and call it Tuesday. The city tries to balance the ledger with public pay, communal funerals, and a list of names that stones carry better than breath. Rituals do the work emotion cannot finish. Arms laid out, speeches made. The city tries to turn loss into instruction without sounding like a manual. No one fully succeeds, but everyone tries. What war teaches a place like this is both unromantic and indispensable. It teaches that discipline is democratic. Everyone gets the same ration of rhythm, and the line checks every man's posture without asking his income. It teaches that hygiene is strategy, not housekeeping. It teaches that supply is destiny. The best plan loses to the emptiest wagon. It teaches that mercy is cheaper than enemies, and that prisoners who live to talk make better boarders than graves that recruit cousins. Even the victors come home altered. The helmet goes on a peg and becomes a water bowl. The spear leans in a corner and becomes a curtain rod for the wind. Men who stood shoulder to shoulder now stand in line at the market and discover that prices rose while they were becoming history. They talk less loudly after dark. They are kinder to doorways. A few take to sleeping against walls because walls do not move. The city recognizes them, sometimes with honors, sometimes only with room. Either way, the house adjusts. A stool appears near the bed so boots don't wake the leg. Bread tastes louder. Silence moves in. If there's a joke left after all that, it is this. The people who look most like statues after a battle are the ones who will now need the least sculpture. They want shade, clean water, and someone to tell the same story back to them until it stops biting. Somewhere in the city, a man sharpens a blade that is not for war at all, just a barber's razor, because the next ritual, after surviving, is letting the face rejoin the world. He hangs a mirror, boils his tools, and waits for the first veteran to sit. The door curtain lifts, a figure ducks, and you can almost hear the city change key from bronze to breath. The barber's basin tips out a ribbon of cloudy water, and the street swallows it without comment. Athens knows what to do with other people's afternoons. It wicks them into cracks, bakes them to memory, and keeps walking. Clean is not a state here, it's a practice, and practice begins with oil. You don't soap yourself into virtue. You oil the dust so it lets go. In the Balanean, the small round bathhouse, men stand around shining like newly invented ideas, then scrape themselves ordinary again with the strigil. The bronze blade sings a soft half-moon on skin, lifting sweat, sand, and the day's negotiations into a tidy curl called gloios. Someone will sell that later as medicine for sprains and pride. Athens wastes nothing, including your effort. The sequence's choreography that smells faintly of resin, warm the room with coals, oil the limbs, dust for grip if wrestling is on the menu, move until joints stop clicking like old doors, scrape, splash, stand there and breathe as if the lungs had just read a good law. Water is cool, not Roman hot. Steam here is more rumor than weather. The Balanean is less spa than clinic for prevention. Sore backs negotiated, bruises acknowledged, ringworm politely exiled with vinegar and sunlight. A smart bathkeeper enforces the tiny commandments that keep communities from sharing more than conversation. Rinse the strigil, don't lend the towel, leave your ego with your sandals. There's a public intimacy to washing that makes honesty cheap. In clothes, a man can pretend to be marble. Naked, he is geography. Scars from the Lorien mines, a shoulder that tells of oars, a knee that still argues with one ambitious jump. Trainers read bodies like ledgers, where you overspent, where you saved, where interest is about to make itself felt. There's laughter, because the alternative is silence, and silence grows mold. Jokes about bellies vote with their own weight. Jokes about baldness travel far because the wind is an accomplice. If philosophy is a dialogue of souls, hygiene is a duet of ankles. Not everything is a bathhouse. Most days, clean happens at home, a basin in the courtyard, a jug tipped by someone whose kindness is a daily muscle. Women manage water like accountants of temperature. Enough warmth to make a child forgive the world, enough cool to make a fever consider repentance. Infants get oil and a scrape with a fingernail. Old men get patience and a chair. You learn the domestic theology of bowls. One for hands before bread, one after, one that has seen too many onions and is now permanently philosophical. The best houses have a corner that smells like sun on clay. The other room no one writes odes to is the latrine. In richer homes, it's a seat over a channel that hums faintly when the neighbors are also industrious. In poorer ones, a pot that teaches dexterity and timing. Public latrines do exist. Stone benches with keyhole openings and the odd view of your fellow citizens' humility. A shared sponge on a stick lives in vinegar when not otherwise employed. The fastidious bring their own. Elsewhere you'll find pissoi, small worn sherds for wiping, smooth by use and opinion. Moral of the story, labeling pottery takes on new urgency once you've heard where yesterday's ostraca retired. Sewers are honest about their limitations. Athens has drains that carry rain and the occasional optimism. They sulk in summer and throw tantrums in storms. Market days test every channel. Fishmongers promise that today's catch is yesterday's rumor. Their offcuts beg to differ and threaten to campaign for office in the gutter. Cats are the city's unofficial inspectors, patrolling for violations with a tail like a metronome. A household that survives keeps two allies close, a broom that has seen things, and a jug of vinegar with the blunt eloquence of a good law. Vinegar cleans knives, cups, and reputations. It stings, and then the air changes. Disease slips through habits the way dust slips through doorframes. Boils, eye infections, scabies, the small republics of discomfort. Love places where skin meets skin and benches forget they are public. The Hippocratic crowd shows up with portable common sense. Air and light are medicines. Crowding breeds fevers. Boiling water is not superstition. And diet can be smarter than charm bracelets. Priests arrive with smoke and prayers, which do not kill microbes but do massacre despair, and despair is often the accomplice of disease. Most Athenians practice double-entry piety, burn time to cheer the spirits, then scrub the basin to disinvite the fungus. Smell is policy. You can tell a safe courtyard by the way. Sun has the last word, a hazardous one by the damp that refuses to leave. Olive oil goes rancid if you treat it like a god. Amphorae want shade and quiet. Garum, yes, fermented fish juice. Asks to be handled like a volatile uncle. Welcome at the table, not on your clothes. Incense covers the gossip of onions, but only for the length of the hymn. If you've ever wondered why Greek temples smell like honesty and wood smoke, it's because frankincense is better at uplifting minds than laundering tunics. Hair is hygiene's slow campaign. Men scrape armpits and groins to keep lice unemployed. Women braid with strategy so that sleeping does not become archaeology. Combs are evidence of optimism. Nits do not respect philosophy. When lice win a battle, the solution is to treat the whole household like a city under siege. Linens to the roofline for solar justice. Blankets beaten until they confess. Cloaks baked against the wall where stone keeps its afternoon heat. The annual festival of clean mattresses is not in the calendar. It lives in shoulders. Markets teach sanitation with prices. Fresh fish shouldn't smell like promises. If your fishmonger burns more incense than a temple, change alleys. Bakers who sweep their thresholds earn better mornings. Grocers with sticky amphorae sell sticky afternoons. You learn to judge a seller by his water jug. Clean rim, no floating biographies, the confidence to let you pour. The agoranomoi, market inspectors, walk with scales and a face that says they have seen where shortcuts end. They will fine you for false measures, and unofficially, for bad mops. The mind adjusts to all this with a sense of proportion. Clean is never absolute. It's the distance between we can eat without consequences and we will tell stories about this for the wrong reasons. Which is why Athenians love ritual. Daily, weekly, seasonal chances to reset the room and the mood. A libation spills the first sip not to waste, but to acknowledge that floors are participants. A hand washing before sacrifice is less theater than reminder. Don't bring yesterday's quarrels to today's pleading. Even jokes have their disinfectant function. Laughter ventilates the stale corners where shame likes to breed. Children learn the rules by being adorable violations. They splash, they sip from the wrong cup, they kiss the dog, they share everything except blankets. Mothers become epidemiologists with soft voices. This water is for hands. This bowl is not for frogs. This wet is not negotiable. Fathers demonstrate the grown-up version, wiping the knife, rinsing the cup, moving the chamber pot to the shady side. The family becomes a chorus of small prevention, and the house repays them with evenings that smell like bread instead of regret. Night puts a mirror on every choice. If you skipped the rinse, the skin whispers its little rebellions. If you were careless with towels, the itch files a petition at midnight. If you boiled the water, sleep thanks you by arriving on time. Lamps smoke. Someone opens a window. Air writes a gentler argument along the rafters. In the quiet, it's easier to see the point. Hygiene isn't purity, it's hospitality. To your own body first, to everyone else second. That's why even the poorest house keeps one basin cleaner than pride. Morning will reset the city like a board game. Stones will warm, drains will mutter, and somewhere a bathkeeper will lift the bar on the door. He'll set out oil, strigils, towels, and the same one-liners that make men feel braver about fungus. A baker will rinse his trough. A fishmonger will swear by the gods and the tide. A priest will swing a censer over a worry that thinks it's immortal. And, in a kitchen not far away, someone will tip a jug, watch water catch light, and reach for the wine that makes it safer and the onion that makes it honest, because the cleanest promises in Athens are the ones the stomach can keep. Begin with a smell that tells the truth faster than any oracle. Onions waking in oil, bread arguing with heat, fish rehearsing its alibi. The market opens like a throat, and every stall is a sentence with an agenda. Athens eats with a memory. Famine has a long shadow, so abundance is a practical philosophy, not a selfie. The fisher lifts a gleaming scummer and swears by Poseidon it slept in water last night, not in salt. You check the eyes, clear as hope, cloudy as poetry, and you learn the rule that saves stomachs and friendships. Trust is a condiment, not a preservative. Breakfast is not a production. It's fuel that minds can carry. Barley cakes, olives, a smear of goat cheese, maybe a fig that taught itself sweetness. Barley keeps the city running like a reliable drumbeat. Wheat shows up for festivals and politics. Poor houses grind at home. Rich ones outsource grinding and import pride. Honey is sunshine with a budget. 1 spoon in hot water turns a cold into a politely escorted guest. 2 spoons turn a child into a philosopher of dessert. If you suspect Greek cuisine is simple, wait until you taste how complicated simplicity gets when survival keeps score. Street food is democracy with toothpicks. Fava puree swirls in a bowl like humble gold. A vendor plays the allos of salesmanship. Onions for a brave day. Flatbreads fold around mystery meat that is probably goat, possibly rumor. You learn how to stand and eat while keeping your sandals out of sauces. This is not written down, but the street will teach you anyway. Somewhere, a boy sells dates and arithmetic with the same speed. He knows exactly how many you'll buy after you taste the first. Kitchen science is older than the words for it. Vinegar is a verb. It cuts, calms, cleans. Boiling water is not superstition. It's gossip. The pot spreads to microbes. Salt is civilization in crystals. It takes fish through winter and stories through awkward silences. Thymus, oregano, bay, herbs that make the tongue believe in order. Garum, yes, Fermented fish sauce lives in small jars like a dare. Used well, it is depth. Used foolishly, it is regret with a passport. A good cook knows that garlic confesses under the knife, and that a pot left to think on low heat will often return wiser. Athletes swear by rules that look minimalist from the couch. Cheese, bread, dried figs, sometimes meat, if training needs an argument. Trainers design menus with verbs, run, lift, throw, not adjectives. Olive oil becomes both fuel and ceremony. A drizzle on maza turns it from survival into comfort. There's a joke in the palestra that the best seasoning is a future you plan to meet with both lungs. The body answers honestly, eat like a festival, move like a rumor, eat like a schedule, move like a law. Fish is the diva of the table, cheap and plentiful when the weather smiles, ruinous when storms teach scarcity. Octopus gets hammered to tenderness because justice demands it. Eel is a luxury you pretend not to want until it appears, and then philosophy fails. Oysters are small syllogisms. If opened today, safe. If opened yesterday, poetry and penance. The wise host serves fish with eyes that could still judge you. The foolish one serves apologies with lemon. Parasites are the city's mean little comedians. Worms love undercooked bravado. Lice believe in communal bedding. Fleas vote for any party that leaves blankets on the floor. Prevention has a menu. Wash greens like you're interrogating them. Cook fish until it stops lying. Teach children that snacks dropped in sand transform into archaeology. The herbalist near the fountain sells fennel for breath, mint for the stomach, and a mixture she swears will evict worms with the decisiveness of a magistrate. Whether it works or not, the act of trying often does. Class differences sit down at every meal. Rich houses host courses that could be mistaken for rhetoric, salty, sour, sweet, and the final argument of honeyed nuts. Poor houses make one pot clever, lentils with onion, barley with greens. A stew that starts humble and finishes persuasive. The miracle is how often both tables borrow from each other's genius. A good recipe is a social climber. It learns to speak in many houses. Amphorae do public service. Stamped with origin, they are passports for taste and accountability for cheats. Wine's second job is to save water from itself. We've already mixed it, but notice how food obeys the same technology of balance. The salted fish calls for mild bread. The rich stew begs for the bite of vinegar. The sticky sweets need the cold of night air as dessert. Edges soften other edges. It's culinary sophrosine, nothing undiluted but hunger. Feasts test the city's nerves and budgets. Weddings turn into edible negotiations between families. Funerals argue for restraint with an eloquence grief can't always match. Religious festivals feed gods with smoke and people with distribution logistics. A good feast is supply chain theater. The right wood for the right heat, the right knives for the right cuts, the right hands and the right tasks, so that nobody becomes myth for the wrong reasons. Burned sacrifices smell impressively pious. Undercooked offerings remind you the gods supposedly prefer smoke. Kitchens are laboratories, but they're also archives. Pots record the story of a household in layers of patina. A favorite pan is a family member with a temper. Tripods wobble or don't. Lids fit or make gossip escape as perfume. The wooden spoon is a peace treaty. Nobody chews it, everybody trusts it. A dull knife turns cooking into punishment. A sharp one turns it into a sermon. Cut cleanly, cut away the inedible. Leave the good part unbruised. Many philosophies could profit from that knife. Trade seasons the city under the tongue. From Egypt comes grain when local fields sulk. From Sicily, cheese that laughs in storage. From the islands, herbs that arrive like footnotes and stay like headlines. Each amphora is a risk wrapped in hope and resin. You learn to read stamps and faces, to listen for the phrase, new this week, in a voice that knows weeks. Fraud is an old profession. The market inspectors are older and carry scales that have shamed more than one charming liar. Children turn meals into curriculum. Counting olives teaches numbers and patience. Breaking bread teaches geometry and fairness. Dropping honey teaches consequences that attract ants faster than moralists. Mothers bribe with raisins and threats of naps. Fathers teach the serious art of not finishing the last piece if a guest might appear. Hospitality is the city's secret muscle. The table expands by intention and miracle. A second bowl, a third spoon, the way a neighbor slips in and becomes someone you were cooking for all along. These are not extras. They are the whole point. Medicine shows up in an apron. Hot barley water for sore throats, garlic for the chicken that refuses to be ordinary, cabbage for mornings that regret evenings. The Hippocratic man at the corner insists on moderation, which the kitchen translates as, one more ladle, not two. It's remarkable how many ailments fall to timing. Eat early, sleep early, don't argue with beans when the wind is wrong. If this sounds like grandmother's wisdom, it's because grandmothers win most clinical trials conducted in kitchens. And then the city eats together in a different way. The theater fills. Vendors weave through rows selling nuts, sesame sweets, small cups of diluted wine. A chorus somewhere warms up. Masks wait for faces, words for mouths. Food hums in the background as appetite turns into listening. The same hands that kneaded bread will clap. The same mouths that tasted garlic will argue about justice, and the same stomachs that prefer moderation will be tested by grief played at full volume. The mind prepares itself without knowing. A good meal is rehearsal for a good argument, and a clean cup teaches you to drink words without choking. The first line strikes, the city leans forward, and the aftertaste of time quietly makes room for a different hunger. The hill below the Acropolis turns into a lung. Stone seats wake with bodies, the morning light pours down the aisle like a patient chorus, and a boy with a tray of sesame sweets weaves through knees as if fate had ankles. The Theater of Dionysus isn't a building so much as an arrangement of attention. Audience in a crescent, gods in the skyline, voices thrown into air that knows how to carry them. You don't need curtains when the sky has already lifted. You need silence, which Athens can achieve for exactly the length of a first line. Tragedy does not knock. It arrives with a prologue and a tone that says, "We're going to be honest today." Masks and large features so even the last row can see a mouth make decisions. Thick-soled boots add height to heroes because grief is easier to watch when it's taller than you. The chorus enters from the side ramps, moving like one large thought deciding its verbs. Their function is both drum and conscience. They remind you that fate has a schedule and that improvisation is expensive. They also keep the actors breathing. No chorus, no oxygen, no insight. The acoustics are an old miracle with practical habits. Whisper at the orchestra, and people at the top row nod as if you've revealed a family secret. All those players split the daylight with double-pipe lamentations, underscoring speeches that would sound pompous if they weren't also true. The McCain, a crane, can fly in a god when mortals have chased themselves into narrative corners. The Ekiklima, a rolling platform, can present a tableau of consequences without being vulgar about blood. These machines are not cheats, they're punctuation. The point is not that a god fixes things, but that the human mess was visible long before the pulley squeaked. A Chorgos, a wealthy sponsor, pays for the chorus and thus buys the right to discover that art is the most unreliable investment with the best returns. If his poet wins, he gets a tripod trophy and the sort of fame that looks good carved in stone. If not, he still earns a civic tan from months of rehearsal under an attic sun. Rehearsal, by the way, is not romance. It is counting steps, air, words, and how many times a mask can be wiped before it becomes a soup. Actors are few and multitask. One man plays kings and messengers by swapping masks and timbre faster than a politician swaps promises. Offstage, boys oil their throats, not their biceps. The audience is the play's unruly co-author. They cheer a clean entrance, groan at convenient prophecies, and hiss at speeches that insult their taxes through metaphor. Vendors pace like minor gods of interruption. Nuts, figs, cups of watered wine, all calibrated so laughter has something to do with its hands. Women are present, contrary to stiff theories, especially at festivals that forgive propriety for the sake of a god who likes transformations. Children press against mothers, learning to track a story the way you track a hawk. By shadow first, then by movement, then by the moment, you realize your mouth is open. Catharsis isn't magic, it's maintenance. A tragedy pulls grief into shape, scrubs it with rhythm and recognition, and hands it back smaller and more usable. You exit, feeling rinsed, not because the world is solved, but because it has been named in a language your chest can hold. The city counts on this hygienic sorrow. So do families who understand that a household with a good cry policy does fewer stupid things afterward. Comedy, for its part, is disinfectant. It reduces powerful men to proportions compatible with neighbors, drags fashionable ideas through mud until they look human, and returns laughter to the mouth like circulation to a sleeping limb. Between pieces, the theater reveals its plumbing. Civic ritual runs across the stage. Lists of benefactors, dead to be honored, alliances to be applauded. A city that prints its memory on stone rehearses it aloud here so that history can be held in ears as well as hands. The priests sit, row one, with a view that includes both actors and audience. A tidy metaphor for gods who don't mind being part of the show. Behind the scenes, seamstresses stitch last-minute hymns that will look like inevitability. And a boy fans a mask so the next speech doesn't smell like philosophy and panic. The Great Dionysia is logistics pretending to be ecstasy. 3 poets, each with a trilogy and a satyr play, judged by 10 men who swear an oath to rank art without starting a war. Tribes compete by proxy through choruses whose knees will remember today for a week. The city pours itself into the enterprise. Foreigners hosted, prisoners released to watch, allies impressed into staying allies. If empire needs soft power, it wears ivy and quotes Euripides. Even failure is productive. A losing play becomes a conversation you can carry home, the kind that makes fish taste different and courts sound differently ambitious. Masks are the strangest teachers. They limit vision and amplify voice, forcing economy in movement and abundance in tone. The actor must project inward before he projects outward, find the clean line of a motive, then ride it until the last row lifts its chins in agreement. When the mask comes off, sweat maps the face in new geographies. Some actors keep edges of their roles for an hour afterward, like twilight clinging to rooftops. The barber later will notice heightened eyebrows and call it art's hangover. There are inevitably health notes in all this. Stone seats argue with backs, and the wise bring cushions. Sun demands head coverings unless you like your catharsis with a side of heat stroke. Shared cups require rinsing. Shared jokes require mercy. Vendors wash their measures in the fountain between acts, which is theater too. Watch the water run brown, then clear, then taste again. Even the chorus practices hygiene by spacing breath and phrasing. No one recites long enough to faint, because fainting in unison is only funny once. The best plays are time travel that forgets to come back entirely. A mother in a mask teaches a city about rage with a clarity that banishes gossip. A king mistakes certainty for law and learns both have supervisors. A messenger delivers the news everyone dreaded and no one expected to hear so beautifully that a hush takes root and stays like a small tree. You can measure the play's success by how slowly people stand during the final notes, the mind lagging the body, unwilling to abandon a world where meaning obeyed meter. When the last chord fades, something practical takes over. Sandals find stones, friends find each other, and judgments bloom. Aeschylus moved the earth. No, Sophocles moved the furniture of the soul. Euripides moved the chairs to the windows and called it weather. Someone proposes a drink, someone else needs a walk. A third wants to see the masks up close, as if the leather still holds a whisper. Vendors count coins. A young actor stares at the empty stage the way one stares at a coastline from which one has already departed in secret. Walking home, you notice how theater has adjusted the city's brightness. The same walls look more moral. The same alley looks like a metaphor. A man who is planning to lie tomorrow upgrades it to a half-truth with remorse. A woman recalculates the price of a silence she has kept too long. Children practice lines and voices that don't fit yet, trying on courage like their father's cloak. Somewhere, a chorus member soaks his calves and winces with the soft pride of a job done that nobody will remember individually. That's the point. A chorus is a civic muscle you flex in public so private mistakes lift less. And then, obligations reclaim the day. A handbill on a wall announces a case to be heard. A merchant disputes measures with operatic sincerity. A magistrate rehearses fairness the way an actor rehearses grief. It turns out theater wasn't an escape. It was scaffolding. Emotion was measured. Speech was tested. The city tuned itself, badly in places, beautifully in others. And now those notes migrate into courts and councils. You can almost hear the water clock at the law court begin to drip, counting not just time, but the residue of the play that will speak through jurors who don't know they're still wearing a chorus in their ribs. The courthouse wakes before the sun. A clerk dusts the cleroterion, the slot-riddled slab that eats bronze identity tickets and spits out fate, and an old man tests the water clock with the tenderness of someone timing his own patience. By mid-morning, the benches are packed with citizens whose sandals squeak like new arguments. Jurors swear an oath to judge according to the laws, the decrees, and their best sense, which is charming because best sense just walked in with a hangover and a personal grudge. Still, the machine works. Chance chooses the panel, pay buys their time, and a city that distrusts single throats lets hundreds clear theirs at once. Case names sound tidy. Dyke for private suits, Graph for public ones, but inside each is a market of motives. A neighbor insists your boundary stone wandered in the night. A father claims his daughter's dowry has become a travel fund. A citizen accuses a politician of proposing a law so illegal it should apologize in stone. The plaintiff speaks first, then the defendant, each granted exactly as much eloquence as the clepsydra can drip. Time literally runs out. You can hear justice evaporate. If you ever needed a metaphor for discipline, try arguing while water audibly says, "Enough." There are no judges in robes, only presiding officials who keep the parts moving and the tempers measurable. The jurors are the law's lungs. They inhale speeches, exhale verdicts, and occasionally cough when someone cites Homer where receipts would be better. Professional speechwriters, logographoi, lurk like tailors, measuring men for sentences that will fit their reputations. A good logographos knows when to bring a baby into court, never, when to bring a witness, always, and when to bring your dead father's good name, carefully and with invoices. Evidence is tactile and moody. Wax tablets, sealed jars, contracts read by a clerk who can make a comma sound like a confession. Free witnesses are noble until they aren't. Enslaved witnesses are reliable only after torture, which is a theory of truth that bleeds on the floor. Everyone pretends this is rational. Everyone also knows Paine's vocabulary is limited. The jury watches faces, weighs pauses, and interprets throat clearing as if it were a text. Athens invented cross-examination without the cross. It's mostly eyebrows, timing, and the communal memory of who borrowed money last spring. Punishments calibrate character with a slide rule. Fines are common, which is the city's way of turning wrongdoing into infrastructure. Sometimes, your mistake buys a new step for a fountain. Atomia, loss of civic rights, arrives like a dimmer switch. First, you can't speak, then you can't serve. Finally, your vote is a ghost. Prison is not romantic. It's a waiting room with chains and the expectation your family will feed you. Death, when it comes, prefers ceremony to spectacle, a cup of hemlock, a body that cools in stages while a friend counts the temperatures of goodbye. It's oddly administrative. The gods get the drama, the courts get the forms. There is a lesser theater next to the law's main stage, arbitration. Private arbitrators, one chosen by each side, try to turn fury into furniture arrangements. Public arbitrators, men over 60 drafted into wisdom, sit with the patience of furniture and the occasional spark of lightning. If settlement fails, the case graduates to the dicasterian, like a disappointing child sent to a stricter school. The best arbitrators know that justice is often a schedule problem solved by returning a jar and promising not to speak to each other at wells. Everything depends on measures. Scales at the market, fixed weights, stamped amphora. These are legal texts you can lift. The Agaranomoi patrol with the joyless charisma of men who fine for sticky ladles. Frauds are shamed at the pillar, sometimes literally chained for an afternoon, so passers-by can subtract respect in real time. It's public health by embarrassment. Mold hates sunlight, and so do cheats. The connection between fair markets and quiet courtrooms is so obvious that only poets forget it on purpose. Sometimes law and religion share a door. Pollution, miasma, follows blood, birth, and improper burial, like an invoice from the unseen. Before a trial in a homicide case, the court itself undergoes small purifications, because truth resents crime. The accused may seek sanctuary, not to dodge judgment, but to slow it down long enough for breath to become testimony. Priests are consulted, oracles quoted. A goat somewhere wonders why decisions require its liver. The city believes two things at once without blinking: that justice is human work, and that humans are messy enough to require godly housekeeping before they start. Write a decree too cleverly, and another citizen can file a graph paranomen to undo it. It's legislative quality control with teeth. The same crowd that cheered your motion yesterday may vote it illegal today, and you will discover that eloquence ages quickly in the sun. Ostracism belongs to festivals and fear. This belongs to Tuesday. The lesson is unglamorous but life-saving. A law must endure its own neighborhood. The comedy of manners inside the courtroom is educational. Litigants perform thrift by wearing old cloaks, perform piety by mentioning mother, perform patriotism by counting their scars out loud. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the jury prefers a good spreadsheet. The most dangerous man in the room is the one who can laugh at himself without letting you do it for him. Juries forgive clumsiness. They punish rehearsal that smells like roses instead of sweat. Health walks in uninvited. Coughs travel faster than metaphors. Crowds are epidemiology with sandals. Doors are propped for airflow, benches wiped with vinegar that argues eloquently with yesterday's touch. A clever clerk rotates cups at the water jar, and the court learns that sanitation is not effeminate but efficient. If you want to see policy save lives, watch what happens the year the Balanean enforces rinsing strigils and the law court enforces rinsing hands. Outside, the penalty pillar waits with its iron collar, a minimalist sculpture of consequences. Someone who watered wine beyond decency or sanded down a weight beyond honesty may find himself an exhibit. People gawk, children memorize, merchants adjust. Public shame is unpleasant medicine, but it prevents the more expensive plague of distrust. Every fine averted by fear is a case the courts don't have to sing. Not all verdicts land cleanly. A man loses a suit and claims the gods will appeal. Another wins and discovers winning makes neighbors colder. A woman who couldn't testify nonetheless moves the city by feeding the right gossip to the right ears at the right hour. The system is porous by design. It expects citizens to finish justice at home by being inconveniently decent. If that sounds naive, consider how many disasters are avoided daily by ordinary people choosing not to be entertaining. When the day ends, the jurors drop their voting discs, one hollow, one solid, into urns that will confess totals without betraying hands. The clerk rolls up the records, the herald lowers the staff, men trickle out arguing about olives and oaths with equal fervor. A boy practices the cadence of a closing plea on his way to the fountain. He uses his father's words in his own lungs and looks surprised when both cooperate. The marble cools, but the city is warmer for the friction. Law did not make anyone an angel. It made many into better neighbors. It taught timing to temper, scales to desire, paragraphs to rage. And yet the air leaving the court always smells faintly of smoke, as if something spiritual had been singed by all that handling. Feet turn, almost by instinct, toward places that understand repair. A shrine with a basin, a threshold with clean water, a priest with a steady hand, and a recipe for ash and relief. Justice can pronounce. Cleansing helps people hear it. Start with smoke that behaves like a thought, thin, rising, undecided. The altar in the courtyard burns olive twigs dipped in wine. The scent is a cousin of kitchens and a neighbor of grief. Religion in Athens is less a belief than a choreography the city performs to keep its nerves steady. You do not ask, "Do you believe?" You ask, "Did you bring the barley? Did you wash your hands? Did you remember the god likes the right side first?" Faith looks suspiciously like logistics, which is why it works, even when no one is certain. Processions pull the city into one long sentence. At dawn, girls who still remember games carry baskets of grain and knife, serious as accountants. Men in wreaths pretend they are not watching their own steps. Musicians persuade the day to keep tempo. The road to a temple is a syllabus. You learn what to wear, clean, what to say, little, and where not to sneeze, everywhere important. A cow decorated with ribbons goes calmly because it has not seen the footnotes. A priest checks for the nod, an omen that the god accepts. Then the blade flashes, not with cruelty, but with the velocity of obligation. Blood kisses the altar, fat smokes like a hymn, the thigh bones go to the god, the edible parts go to the neighborhood. And suddenly sacrifice looks like community logistics with poetry on top. Temples are less houses than addresses. The statue sees without eyes because everyone behaves better when marble looks their way. Priests are managers of attention and ash. They keep lists. Who promised what? Who delivered? Who believes the god appreciates late payments? They also keep recipes older than gossip. Ash and water for purifying, wine for disinfecting, smoke for ceremony, and mosquitoes alike. Asclepios, god of healing, prefers quiet and a bed. You sleep in his precinct and hope for a dream with instructions. A snake might wander by and remind you that skin learns to be new by letting go of the old, which is biology's way of agreeing with theology. In the morning, a priest listens like a doctor and prescribes like a grandmother. Rest, broth, a walk at a kinder hour, fewer speeches. Votive offerings hang like a museum of almost accidents. Little clay legs, bronze eyes, carved hands. Gratitude in the shape of body parts that once misbehaved and then reconsidered. The walls are crowded with rescue notes. For the fever's retreat, for my son's voice, for the ship that changed its mind. Skeptics roll their eyes, believers bow theirs, and everyone reads because reading hope is contagious. If you want to understand why religion survives plagues, stand under a ceiling of thank yous while your own cough decides whether to stay. Purity rules look fussy until you do the math. Birth and death make miasma, ritual pollution, call it spiritual static, which the city treats like smoke in a kitchen. Open the windows, don't cook for a bit, let the room remember itself, wash with running water, avoid sacred spaces for a set number of days, bring a small offering when you return. The side effect is epidemiology. Fewer crowds, more hand-washing, more time for grief to be less contagious. Ancient religion sometimes does with ritual what science will later do with charts. Both share a crush on clean basins. Festivals compress meaning into days that smell like resin and hot bread. The Panathenaia gives Athena a new peplos, a robe woven by women whose stitches are paragraphs in a civic novel. The procession is a moving resume, cavalry glittering, medics carrying trays, elders on carts, prisoners, sometimes, released to watch because mercy is a headline that looks good in sunlight. At the Great Dionysia, art and wine hold hands while the city pretends it's not auditing the budget from the front row. Other feasts are smaller and practical. Demeter's rites asking the earth to remember wheat, Artemis minding the boundary between childhood and courage, Apollo convincing fevers to try another neighborhood. Omens are the city's way of negotiating with chaos. A bird takes the wrong turn and someone cancels a trip. A sneeze at the wrong line in a speech makes even brave men consider vocabulary more hygienic than destiny. Oracles are customer service for fate. Delphi speaks poetry on purpose, so you have to do some work. Dodona murmurs through oak leaves. Tiny local shrines mumble in more domestic dialects. The trick is not to outsource your thinking to ambiguity, but to let ambiguity slow you down where speed would be dumb. If that sounds like therapy, well, Athenian therapy can wear laurel or linen with equal skill. Household worship is small and stubborn. A little Hermes hangs by the door. A household Zeus keeps an eye on jars. The hearth goddess Hestia receives the first crumb, so meals remember where they began. You sprinkle barley like punctuation on the floor before you speak to the unseen. Babies get circlets of wool and a tour of the fireplace, so the house can learn the name it needs to keep safe. Even people who forget birthdays remember the day a child was formally brought into the kin. It is both legal and tender, which is Athens in a nutshell when it behaves. When plague sweeps in like a rumor with teeth, ritual and pragmatism braid themselves into a rope. Corpses are burned faster, not because beliefs change, but because smoke beats contagion, processions shrink, libations grow more sober, laws on waste disposal suddenly sound like hymns. Priests smoke sanctuaries with thyme because thyme lifts the mood and annoys insects. Doctors fumigate rooms with the same herb because repentance is more likely when lungs stop panicking. A city holds its breath together and then, one morning, breathes again because that is what cities do if they are lucky and careful. There is hypocrisy and there is humor, and often they are cousins. A man brings a sacrificial cock to Asclepios for a cure, is healed, and forgets to pay. Later, dying, he famously remembers to settle the debt, proving that accounts outrun bodies. Another swears an oath by Apollo and then lies so elegantly the god must admire the craftsmanship. People laugh because laughter is cheaper than lightning, and gods in Athens are less tyrants than landlords. They want rent on time and a clean courtyard. Breaking things is allowed if you fix them and learn. Women carry a different set of keys. At the Thesmophoria, they vanish into a women-only festival for Demeter, emerging 3 days later with jokes too efficient for male ears and compostable miracles. Decayed piglets mixed into seed to bribe the soil into fertility. Men pretend to be scandalized and are really relieved someone spoke to the ground in a language it respects. At home, women pour tiny libations to ancestors and the recently departed, maintaining a relationship across a thin wall of air. Memory is the most enforceable law. Libations are its notary. Not every god is marble. River gods are mostly practical. They remember floods and accept apologies in the currency of reeds and repaired banks. Small shrines watch crossroads so choices behave. Even boundary stones get offerings, sprigs, oil, a muttered request that neighbors remain realistic. The sacred bleeds into the ordinary because the ordinary keeps trying to become sacred when no one is watching. A well that never runs dry, a fig tree that forgives bad pruning, a stretch of wall that never collapses, even though 6 different cousins lean on it during harvest arguments. The calendar is a map of breaths. New moons mean reset. Auspicious days make rash acts look rehearsed. Unlucky days make prudence fashionable. City officials consult lists to avoid voting the gods into bad moods. Households consult grandmothers. There is a lovely, ridiculous specificity to it all. Yes, to business on the 8th. No to journeys on the day after the market. Maybe to confessing love when the moon is bright enough to read your bad handwriting. The point isn't cosmic micromanagement. The point is rhythm. In a place where fever and famine can audition without notice, rituals give time a shape you can hold. If you're tempted to roll your eyes at all this management, try going a week without it. No small offerings, no hand washings, no thank you to the familiar corners. The house goes slightly feral. Arguments pick up splinters. Sleep forgets manners. Ritual is the WD-40 of a world that creaks. It doesn't heal a broken leg. It makes the crutch less rude. It doesn't cure despair. It gives despair an appointment and a bench. As the sun slides toward gold, a man pauses at a wayside altar and spills 3 drops of wine. Not because anyone is watching, but because someone always is, if not a god, then the part of himself that behaves better with witnesses. He wipes the rim, straightens the ribbon, and continues, lighter by an ounce of anxiety. Down the street, the Asclepieion prepares pallets for sleepers who need a dream with instructions. In a kitchen, a woman ties a red thread around a child's wrist because a grandmother once said so, and the thread is cheaper than fear. On a roof, a boy looks at the moon and privately promises to do something brave when it's just a little smaller. And somewhere between promise and sleep, the city remembers it is a body that needs both breath and bones. Temples provide the breath, laws provide the bones, food the muscle, theater the circulation, baths the skin. Tomorrow will ask for all of it again, and tomorrow is impatient. A door closes softly, a lamp lifts its small sun, and the first prayer of evening is the simplest one Athens knows. Let the house be clean enough for welcome, and the street safe enough for return. Begin with a knock at the courtyard door and a smell of thyme. The doctor arrives carrying a little chest that looks like a traveling argument. Bronze probes, linen, cups for cupping, a knife that wants to be reasonable, and a bundle of reeds for splints. He is not a priest, though he bows at the hearth, and not a magician, though he enjoys a good coincidence. He is a registrar of causes. He will ask about your sleep, your stools, your thirst, your grief, and the day you stopped liking goat cheese. He will look at the sky, because the wind files claims with the body, and he will look at the well, because water is a philosopher when it is clear and a liar when it is not. Diagnosis begins as gossip with discipline. He listens for patterns, fevers that rise at night like bad ideas, coughs that march households like small armies, pains that circle the body the way neighbors circle news. He asks what you ate, and you wish that yesterday's oysters had been more philosophical. He touches your wrist, not to count seconds. Nobody has seconds yet, but to feel a rhythm that's either cooperating or composing its own tragedy. He smells your breath, looks at the tongue, presses under the ribs, and writes a case history in his head that starts with weather, passes through diet, and ends, if he can help it, in regimen rather than miracle. Regimen is the city's quiet medicine. Bread adjusted from wheat to barley because your pride is not helping your bowels. Wine watered more than your father-in-law would approve. Walks early, not late, because noon is a tyrant you can avoid. Baths that scrape away the hurry before it turns into rash. Sleep in a cooler room, with your feet slightly raised because blood has opinions even if no one has a word for circulation. The prescription sounds like manners. That's the point. Athenian medicine treats the patient and the household. Clean linen, an aired mattress, someone assigned to say, "Not today, he's resting," with holy conviction. When the body speaks in capital letters, tools answer. Cupping draws congested blood to the surface and leaves circles that say, "I have been cared for," in a language visible from the street. Cautery persuades stubborn tissue to reconsider, a serviceable argument made with a hot iron and a very steady hand. Poultices, fig, barley, ground bean, are applied like apologies, warm, sincere, patient. Honey seals wounds with gentleness and a talent for telling bacteria to mind their business. Vinegar cleans blades and pride. Wine cleans the cut and calms the man watching. If the doctor recommends cutting, he prefers the parts that forgive: abscesses, boils, the occasional nail that went to war with a sandal and lost in slow motion. Broken bones are geometry with consequences. The doctor's assistants, the sensible nephew, the neighbor with reliable shoulders, pull in opposite directions until the limb stops insisting on its own theory. Splints are lashed with patience, swelling is bribed with cold water and quiet. A good set is an invisible triumph, the kind you brag about only years later when the weather changes. Dislocations are reduced with leverage and a grim little joke: if you can swear, you can heal. Midwives run a different clinic with the authority of experience and a toolbox of steady voices. They know how to turn a breach with the least drama possible, how to cut the cord when the knife is clean and the omens are semi-comatose, how to persuade milk to arrive with warm cloths and shameless optimism. They have pessaries for stubborn wombs, fumigations for the moods that trod on a woman's sleep, and a scorn for men who turn childbirth into epics. The doctor respects them because he likes to be allowed back into houses where life goes sensibly on. Plague changes the page layout. The city learns what Thucydides already suspected. Crowding is a bully, heat conspires with panic, and despair is communicable. Fever starts in the head and marches downward like a conquering army. Eyes redden, tongues crack, thirst becomes a vocation, cough, rash, ulcers, a longing for cold water that is never satisfied. Friends who nurse fall ill. Those who don't are despised until there is no energy left for hatred. The doctor can't promise safety, he can promise precision. He separates the dying from the dead, so hope isn't wasted. He orders water boiled and cups rotated. He prescribes cool rooms, thin gruel, and the decency of not pretending, because pretense is the one contagion always under our control. Prognosis is his favorite instrument. Not prophecy, he leaves that to Oakes, but the craft of telling a family what to prepare their hearts for. He looks for the crisis day, counts the rhythm of chills, watches the sputum change color with the seriousness usually reserved for omens. When he says, by the seventh day, he is not courting fate. He is preparing logistics: wood, linen, witnesses, broth. If the tide turns, he sees it first in the way sleep lands on the face. If it does not, he says the words that uncurl hands from hope without breaking them. The Hippocratic Oath is less golden tablet than community rumor. He swears to teach sons of his teacher without fee, though gifts happen, to do no harm, though harm is sometimes the cost of preventing larger harm, to avoid what belongs to others by right, wives, wallets, necromancy, to keep secrets. Because a city is a sieve, and dignity is a patient. He will not claim to fix everything. He will claim to measure and to try. In a culture that loves speech, his mercy is often silence. Rival healers crowd the stage. The iatromantis, half seer, half therapist, prescribes a dream and a pilgrimage. The herbalist near the fountain sells fennel for breath, willow bark for pain, and a mixture that terrifies worms into monasticism. Charlatans flourish in the shade of fear, smearing lead white on rashes, promising youth with arsenic in a prettier jar. The doctor's competition policy is simple. When their cure leaves fewer fevers and more living, he will buy them a drink. Until then, he will clean the cup and argue politely. Public health is a surprisingly busy god. Fountain houses are maintained with the zeal of priests. Market inspectors weigh loaves and honesty on the same scale. Bathkeepers enforce the rinsing of strigils with the calm of men who have seen ringworm up close. In plague time, funerals become swift and merciful. In harvest time, drains are cleared before they write their own tragedies. The doctor approves because policy is just medicine written large and paid for in taxes instead of tears. Anatomy remains a guess wrapped in observation. No dissections? Custom shuts that door, so the body is mapped by wounds, butchery, and the moral imagination. Hearts are furnaces, lungs are bellows. The brain is a wet inconvenience unless you hit it, in which case it becomes legislation. Yet for all the guesses, the touch is true. Keep wounds clean, keep rooms aired, keep tempers cool. The miracle is that these three rules save more lives than any hymn to panacea. Our doctor ends his day writing on wax, the city's memory on a leash. He notes a fever that broke with a nosebleed, a cough that surrendered to patience, a rash that apologized to vinegar, a man who recovered because his friend had the courage to say, no visitors. He closes the chest, thanks the household for their orderliness, and refuses payment from the widow who has only gratitude and an unstoppable tendency to feed people. He eats a fig, because medicine believes in figs, and steps into the street where evening has leaned the color of bronze against the walls. He passes the Asclepian and nods toward its sleepers, men hunting instructions in dreams. And he is not jealous. Let the gods speak, he is a good doctor too. The city hums with its balanced noises, pestle, loom, children learning the ethics of not touching the knife. Somewhere a barber boils his razors, somewhere a poet polishes a line about fate, somewhere a magistrate drafts rules about drains, bodies, words, and laws, all attempting hygiene. The doctor turns a corner and finds the market thinning, the wine cooling, and the precise distance between cure and care. Close enough to touch, not close enough to boast. Which is exactly where the next knock on the door will begin. At first light, the harbor lifts its eyelids. Ropes creak, mastheads blink, and a gull that thinks it's a magistrate inspects everyone's breakfast. Piraeus is Athens, with salt added. Faster, louder, more honest about money. Warehouses exhale the breath of places you've never seen. Egyptian grain, Thracian timber, Cypriot copper, perfume from somewhere that spells expensive with extra syllables. The long walls pour citizens into the docks like water down a polished channel, and the city's heart learns another rhythm. Oar, shout, stamp, count. If the agora is where Athens reasons, the harbor is where it remembers to eat. Ships here aren't scenery, they're opinions with keels. A trireme sits low and predatory, all ribs and speed, a knife someone taught to swim. Merchantmen squat kindly, mouths full of amphorae strapped like well-behaved children. Every hull tells a biography, pitch lines like wrinkles, patched planks like healed arguments, a new sail that means a partner forgave something. Dock workers read ships the way philosophers read faces. They can spot a storm you missed because they remember which ropes sulk in damp. They can tell you which captain negotiates in drachmas and which in decibels, and they're right, more often than oracles. Customs officials, the Telenai, arrive with tablets and the self-esteem of men who have caught famous liars. Stamps on amphorae are passports with accents. Weights are tested because fraud loves travel. The agoranomoi knows around measures and memories. They find short merchants into tall stories. In a city that carves decrees into stone, the harbor is the footnote. Here's where law meets appetite. Grain is priced like weather. If ships are late, rhetoric tightens and bread learns humility. When a convoy comes in, you can feel the whole polis exhale into a loaf. Sailors wear nations the way other men wear scarves. You hear Lydia in a curse, Egypt in a prayer, Sicily in a joke that turns into a recipe halfway through. Medics run shops that sell everything from rope to guilt, and they know credit histories the way priests know hymns. Behind a counter stacked with oil jugs, a Phoenician scribbles a letter home in characters that look like a ship waking. He likes Athens because money applauds here, even if citizenship does not. He likes the baths because the water is clean enough to forgive a voyage. He tolerates philosophers because they buy things. Every creed is adorable once it pays. Hygiene at sea is a contract with compromise. On a trireme, the benches are a democracy of backs. Everyone sweats into the same air, and vinegar is the law. Cups pass and are rinsed because nothing sinks morale like someone else's cough. Food is honest. Barley cakes, dried fish with opinions, onions that keep secrets badly. The ship's boy boils water because the last time he didn't, the captain learned what dysentery does to glory. In port, the first thing crews want is not wine, it's a basin. Men scrape salt from their skin with strigils and scrape distance from their voices with laughter. Clean comes before loud, or loud becomes regret. Disease travels with stories, the harbor loves both. A rash that began politely in another city disembarks, wearing confidence. A fever follows cargo as faithfully as a receipt. When sickness knocks, Piraeus learns modesty, fewer crowds, more air, prayers that smell like thyme and also like vinegar. Officials enforce the unsung rules. No dumping offal where the tide pretends to be generous, dead fish out and never back in, drains cleared before they acquire accents. The Hippocratic crowd will mutter about miasma and wind. The priests will smoke sanctuaries. The dockhands will do the preventive math faster than either. Don't touch what everyone has touched, boil what everyone has drunk. Money talks loudest, right before it sinks. Bankers keep coin tables in shaded arcades and count risks as if they were olives. Loans to ship owners wear interest like a helmet. A storm can repossess your optimism in an afternoon. Bottomry contracts pledge the ship and cargo if the sea turns prosecutor. Two men argue, one with charts, one with a god. The notary writes both down and smiles, because ink likes certainty more than waves do. When a vessel returns, interest turns into songs. When it doesn't, interest turns into relatives with long memories. Entertainment has its own ledger. Taverns pour watered wine and dispatch rumors with it. Owless music tucks itself into rooms that smell like roasted mackerel and unwise promises. Brothels keep straightforward hours and complicated account books. Laughter is cheap until it isn't. A clever madam hires a doctor for 2 mornings a week. She disinfects as if gods were auditors. The same city that preaches moderation invents the market for forgetting. You can judge a port by how quickly it sells you back your name in the morning. Work is rhythm, not heroism. Stevedores move amphorae in chains of hands that know to rotate before wrists revolt. Rope makers twist hemp into logic. Sail makers sew straight lines into wind. A shipwright's mallet makes a noise that organizes the day. He smells like pitch and carefulness. He will lecture you about knots as if they were ethics. The bowline is trust, the reef knot is marriage, the slip knot is policy. He will also tell you that a hole is a promise you make to people you won't meet, the ones who will never know your name but will thank you with a life. Religion does not stay away just because money shouts. A small shrine to Poseidon stands where men can mutter into their hands before loading. 3 drops of wine, a chipped shell, a ribbon that remembers a safe return. The harbor god gets gifts that travel. Tiny anchors, toy ships, a bronze fish with philosophical eyes. When a storm blows up like a lawsuit, the quay fills with faces turned seaward, lips practicing the kind of bargaining prayer that begins, if. Gratitude later is a better party than relief, and it smells cleaner. Regulation is the humorless friend everyone secretly loves. The city sets storage rules for grain because rats are excellent at democracy. It inspects fish on arrival because markets invent truths faster than stomachs can refute them. It fixes exchange rates so foreign coins don't breed confusion, then mints its own owl-stamped silver that travels like a rumor with good references. The owl is everywhere, on coins, cups, graffiti, which means wisdom has a side hustle as accounting. The dockside pharmacy is informal but effective. Sailors swear by garlic and superstition in equal measure. Both keep company tolerable. Sunburns meet olive oil, cuts meet honey, salt sores meet patience. The barber near the rope shop specializes in turning pirates into people again. He boils razors, trims pride, and returns mouths to their better jokes. If you want to measure civilization, count the number of clean blades within walking distance of fish. Children make the harbor a school. They learn to swear in 4 languages and to choose the cleanest cursing. They learn to jump between moorings without testing the god of bruises. They learn the weight of an empty amphora and how different it feels full, which is math with handles. A boy runs errands for a banker and becomes bilingual in numbers. A girl sells bread with the efficiency of a quartermaster and will one day manage a household that never runs out of salt. Education here is not future-facing. It is tide-facing. Miss the moment and the lesson sails. At dusk, the water turns the color of promises kept. Nets hang like lace from a world that can be tender. Anchors touch bottom with the intimacy of returning. Peddlers close shutters. A last cart rattles with leftover onions that will be tomorrow's honesty. Somewhere a scribe tallies cargo under a lamp, and the flame writes a single trembling column your stomach can read. Enough. Enough grain got in. Enough timber, enough oil, enough hope to calm the hill where people argue about virtue. The long walls pull the city back through the evening, and the sea's breath follows, cooler, briny, full of stories that will sleep in amphorae until breakfast. You walk home with the taste of salt on your lips and the irritating knowledge that the harbor's hygiene, its rinsed cups, its rotated ropes, its cleared drains, looks suspiciously like the recipe for any place that wants to remain alive. A corner turns, the streets narrow, voices change key from trade to supper. And just before the houses swallow the last stripe of sea, you hear, faint as a rigging hum, the sound of a drum that isn't maritime at all, the slow civic heartbeat that gathers men on a hill with their hands raised, ready to decide how to spend what the water brought in, and how to keep both health and hope from leaking out the way tides do when nobody minds them. Morning shifts begin before the city has decided what kind of day it is. In a lane off the agora, a potter pushes his wheel with a foot that never learned to be bored. Wet clay centers, hands close. A cylinder rises, trembles, becomes a bowl because the day needs bowls. The kiln is a blunt god. Either you propitiate it with patience and steady heat, or it eats a week's work in 1 coughing hour. Ash tells the truth faster than critics. The potter's wife judges the dawn by the color of the smoke, the potter by the sound of it. No philosopher writes a dialogue on this, which is a pity. The kiln is a better teacher of proportion than most men with styluses. 2 doors down, the bronze smith makes sparks that travel as rumors. Bellows give the metal a temper, the hammer a grammar, and suddenly a strip becomes a hinge. A hinge becomes a door that behaves. He speaks in weights and degrees. His apprentices speak in burned thumbs and the new respect that follows. There is a rhythm to the shop. Heat, strike, quench, listen. Heat, strike, quench, adjust. When iron is stubborn, he cures it with patience. When customers are stubborn, he cures them with a price that includes a lecture. On the far shelf, a row of strigils waits for the gymnasium. Hygiene has an industrial supply chain. Tanners live where the city prefers not to breathe. Hides soak in pea and lime. Hair slips. The river negotiates for relief. Neighbors develop a sense of humor or move. The tanner's hands look permanently gloved with work. Out of that stink-walk sandals that will outlast marriages, waterskins that will tell your thirst to calm down, shields that will convince spears to reconsider. Civilization has a smell. Sometimes it's courage, sometimes it's compromise. The tanner learns both. The Lorien mines are another planet nailed to this one by accounts. Boys with shoulders too quick for their bones crawl into galleries that only admit lamp and breath. Women sort ore and wind that tastes like metal and decision. Water is a rumor, air a budget. Picks talk in a dialect of insistence. Timbers Creek vocabulary you learn if you like seeing tomorrow. The silver pays for ships that look like birds in history books. The cough pays for that silver. Athens knows this and says thank you badly, as cities do when their coin is clean and their conscience isn't. Medics oil the city where pride squeaks. They keep shops that remember your debts more accurately than your friends do. import timber that becomes roofs, sell purple that becomes mistakes. They own slaves and are owned by taxes, cannot vote, but can bankrupt you with competence. When you need rope at dawn or credit at dusk, you suddenly believe in immigration. Ask the street which citizen knows what a balance sheet is. It will point to a man whose accent arrived by ship. Enslaved people move like the city's unacknowledged metronome. In workshops, they grind, carry, tally. In houses, they pour, wash, fetch, and sometimes quietly decide. A gifted steward runs an oikos with a precision that makes his owner look like a genius. A gifted maid knows which jar might fall and which marriage might if someone doesn't speak gently now. Some teach boys their letters, some never learn their own names beyond the possessive. Manumission exists, freedom on paper that still smells like someone else's ink. Paramount ties many freed people back to former masters with clauses disguised as gratitude. Freedom comes in installments, interest is social. In the shipyard, a mallet paces out the day in patient iambs. Keel, rib, plank, pitch. The order is theology. Shipwrights argue about curves like poets about metaphors. A bad joint is a future headline. A good scarf joint is trust expressed in wood. A boy learns knots as ethics. The bowline is faith that holds. The reef knot is marriage, firm when pulled evenly, treacherous when not. The slip knot is policy, useful, but keep your fingers clear. Later, these men will listen to assembly speeches about empire and know, without being told, how much timber and tendon the oracle forgot to mention. Barbershops are newsrooms with blades. A man comes in as rumor and leaves as face. The barber sterilizes his razor in boiling water because he prefers customers to return with stories rather than infections. He is part doctor, part diplomat. A quick nick draws vinegar and a faster apology. A boast draws a raised eyebrow and an accurate memory of last week. Men who yesterday shoved bronze into other men's opinions now sit very still for a line along the cheek that announces civility to strangers. Commerce polishes, hygiene audits. Accidents are the city's unplanned curriculum. A mason falls and everyone becomes a paramedic. Cloak for a sling, water that won't betray, a plank for dignity. A boy at the millstone proves that stones keep turning after the joke ends. A cook forgets that oil is eager. Honey, vinegar, and clean cloth do their ordinary miracles. The doctor arrives with calm and lints the panic out of the air. The lesson is always the same. Prevention is cheaper than heroism and tastes better. Guilds exist without charters. Clusters of skill plus gossip plus the quiet enforcement of standards. If your amphorae crack, potters stop selling you clay. If your measures lie, agaranomoy fine you into honesty. If your razors infect, customers choose to be hairy. Public shame is infrastructure here. The penalty post with its iron collar stands at the market's edge and has opinions about fraud that it shares with your neck. Children learn fractions from fines. Women run economies that historians misplace. They contract for wool, manage servants, price olives correctly, convert leftovers into future. Poorer women sell greens, fish, garlands. Richer ones own the logistics of calm. A widow with sense becomes a CFO with a veil. Midwives bill in favors as well as coin. Laundresses supply the city's introduction to respectability. Medic women run taverns and troubleshoot half the harbor after dark. The ledger of their competence has many columns. Men quote only the ones that rhyme. Taxes are a weather system. Iceforai, property levies, blow in when war wants new shoes. Liturgies, public services, arrive with invitations disguised as compliments. A man brags that he financed a chorus. His wife notes that he financed it with dinners she will now unfinance from the pantry. Antidosis hovers like a ghost. If you say you're poorer than me, let's swap estates and see. And suddenly public spirit wears an audit. Nothing produces honesty like the threat of moving day. The day ends the way good days do, with hands that are tired but not trembling. The potter stacks cooling bowls that sound like polite bells when touched. The bronze smith dampens coals until they sigh like animals going to sleep. A stray spark discovers philosophy and dies of it. The tanner washes his arms in vinegar and calls it prayer. The shipwright runs a palm along a new plank and hears, in the grain, weather yet to be argued with. In the mines, lamps go out in an order that the surface will never learn. On the hill, a herald rehearses a speech about funding and strategy that will pretend not to smell like sweat. You can map the polis by its calluses. The stonecutters are square, the oarsmen's long, the weavers fine, the scribes smudged, the slaves hidden because eyes slide away. Athens is a library of hands you could read if you weren't in such a hurry to quote the famous voices. If you stop and look, you notice that the city's glory is nothing but the arrangement of other people's mournings into the shape of your pride. As lamps bead along the streets, the barber hangs his mirror and wipes it clear for tomorrow. He knows who will come first, not a general, not a poet, but a man whose work stained him in honest ways and whose wife would like to see the person she married rather than the day's residue. He will sit, sigh, and surrender his face to sharpness that has been boiled, polished, and made trustworthy. The razor will hiss, the water will cloud, and out of that small domestic weather a different topic will raise its head. The house that receives a clean man, the courtyard that orders a tired hour into sense, the hearth where fatigue turns into supper and laughter. And just like that, the city's next lesson steps over the threshold. Home in Athens begins with a square of sky. Not the skyline, your private patch. A courtyard where light behaves like a guest who knows when to speak and when to sit. Rooms gather around it, the way sensible relatives gather around a table. The Andron hosts company and opinions. The gynekion produces order, wool, and miracles. Storerooms keep the edible future calmer than people do. Walls are mud brick on stone, plastered smooth and whitewashed yearly, as if the house puts on clean thoughts for spring. Windows are small because heat is loud. Doors are few because thieves and wind are extroverts. A good house lets air pass, as if it had a passport and keeps noise outside, holding a polite fig. At the heart sits the hearth, Hestia's square of continuity. It cooks, it dries, it listens. It stains beams with smoke that becomes a calendar of winters. Morning begins with an ember coaxed back to work. Evening ends with a last pinch of flour to the flame, a domestic treaty signed in crumbs. The fuel is wood, grapevine, a little olive prunings. Never pride, although some husbands try. The hearth also sanitizes the day. Meat cured, fish smoked, damp chased out of blankets. Religion and hygiene nod at each other like colleagues who won't admit they share a desk. Furniture refuses to be precious. Clini, couches that dine by day and sleep by night, are democracy for spines. Low tables migrate like well-trained goats. Chests keep linens from growing biographies. Stools multiply wherever conversation threatens to become philosophy. On wealthier floors, pebble mosaics offer birds, waves, and geometry to feet that need diversion. On plainer ones, tamped earth glows when doused and swept, as if cleanliness were a species of light. Carpets appear when guests do and disappear when oil confesses. Air is an art. In summer, you cross-ventilate. Door here, shutter there, jug of water stationed in the path of a breeze to persuade it to be kinder. In winter, you deploy the brazier, a portable sun with opinions, and remember that charcoal eats oxygen like a poet eats compliments. Every family knows a cautionary tale that begins, "He shut the window to save heat," and ends, "Let this be a lesson." The lesson is eternal. Warmth is generous only when supervised. Vinegar and common sense are the house's building inspectors. The soundtrack is unrecorded but unforgettable. The loom clacks its patient syllables, a language of warp and weft that explains civilization better than most speeches. The handmill hums barley into breadable time. A mortar debates garlic until garlic apologizes. Cats patrol beams with the ethics of small aristocrats. Dogs practice door policy. Children practice physics with amphora and are asked to stop immediately. From the roof, someone beats a rug with the rhythmic confidence of a drummer who knows he is improving history. If an Athenian house were a hymn, it would have a percussion section of chores. Clean is a strategy, not an achievement. Dust returns like an audience, therefore the broom rehearses daily. Bedding goes to the line where sun and wind argue over jurisdiction. Lice learn to dread combs that have zero sense of humor. Vinegar, hero of unheroic triumphs, sterilizes knives, cups, and pride. Water is rationed, fetched from fountain houses and hydrii that teach shoulders geometry. The clever place the wash basin near the door. Guests enter as citizens and leave as slightly better citizens after they rinse their hands. Storerooms are the brain, big jars, pithoi, sleep half buried for coolness, stuffed with grain that sounds like rain when stirred. Amphorae stand shoulder to shoulder like a choir, oil, wine, vinegar, each with a stamp, a story, and a schedule. Salt is the quiet tyrant that saves fish from dishonor and debt from drama. Mice audition nightly. Cats conduct harsh interviews. A neat ledger lives in a head rather than on a wax tablet. So many measures of barley left, so many debts forgiven because the neighbor's child coughed in a way that refused arithmetic. Thresholds teach ethics. A swept doorstep is civic duty and ankle insurance. Guests step over a clean line and become obligations. Enemies step over it and become complicated. The little shrine by the door, Hermes with a smirk maybe, receives a drop of wine to keep travel friendly, even when it's only from courtyard to market. Shoes pause at the lintel. Dust learns manners. If you want to measure a household, check the broom's bristles and the way the door shuts. Quietly is a virtue. The andron transforms on cue. By day, storage and strategy. By night, symposium. Couches angle toward a crater where wine meets water and civilization meets its curfew. The symposiarch, elected for taste and temperament, dilutes both arguments and wine with the same ratio. Songs travel, riddles happen, and the floor receives libations it pretends to appreciate. When the laughter is wise, the cups are clean, the doorbolt is firm, the city feels possible. In the morning, the andron remembers. It is also a place to hang herbs and hide toys. The gynekion, poorly translated as women's quarters, is not a prison, it's a factory of continuity. Here, the spindle spins, the dye pot thinks in purples and madder reds, and the mending basket edits the week's mistakes. Here, births are planned for and survived, fevers negotiated, dowries packed in Cedar's grammar. Here, economics is spoken in cloth, not coin. Men say women weren't inside. The city lives because the inside never missed a deadline. Walls carry dignity and reminders. Painted bands of ochre, red and black, tether the eye to order. Ears of grain hang drying under eaves. A small Zeus Ctesios, household Zeus, watches over jars. A clay snake curls where children notice. And a sprig of laurel insists the door isn't just wood, but a boundary with policies. If a house has a philosophy, it is this: cherish edges of bowls, of rooms, of tempers. Repairs happen with theater and thrift. A cracked jug becomes a colander. A broken handle becomes a lesson in the tensile strength of friendship. A sprung door learns obedience from a wedge. Roof tiles replaced after winter storms set the tone for spring. Scrape moss, reset overlaps, thank the god of sloping things. A wobbly tripod becomes a 3-act tragedy if ignored. Tightened, it becomes modest triumph. The best handiwork leaves no quotation marks around itself. Animals work the margins. Chickens negotiate loudly. Goats trim borders you didn't know you had. A donkey turns a millstone into bread without understanding economics, and therefore without complaining. Their waste is compost with ambitions. Their presence makes children compassionate and adults realistic. The house smells like life, which is to say, sometimes like victory, sometimes like onions, and usually like both fresh bread and clean smoke. Light is architecture you don't have to quarry. Morning washes the plaster and finds the tired places on faces. Noon scolds, evening forgives. Lamps, clay, modest. Burn olive oil that yesterday wanted to be food and tomorrow will be light again. Soot collects where stories did. A quick scrape, a rinse, and the ceiling remembers its manners. A careless wick can turn a good night tragic. Households learn the choreography of flame the way sailors learn wind. Money wanders through rooms disguised as habits. Economies of movement save limbs. Economies of fuel save forests. Economies of speech save marriages. A well-run house looks quiet because the loud work was done an hour earlier. Hospitality, 2 extra cups, 3, costs less than enmity and pays back in crises. The calendar lives in the pantry. Panathenia approaching. Save oil. Harvest late. Stretch grain with legumes and jokes. Policy begins where the jar says, enough. Neighbors are inevitable and useful. Shared walls conduct gossip and heat. Shared wells breed etiquette. Shared courtyards transform emergencies into group projects. The woman next door has a sharper needle and a sharper memory. The man across the lane has a ladder that has seen more roofs than sunsets. Borrowing is an art that thrives when returns are punctual and jars are cleaner than when they left. The city is a conspiracy of thresholds doing each other favors. At night, the house lowers its voice. The hearth ebbs to a red thought. The brazier becomes a small moon. The cistern dreams in cool circles. Children submit to sleep with a resistance appropriate to monarchs. Adults rehearse tomorrow in whispers. Who will fetch water? Who will avoid the charming liar at the olive stall? Who will ask the neighbor whether her niece is ready to learn to spin? Security is a bar across a door in the knowledge that more than one person heard it drop. What a house knows, it teaches without speeches. That clean is kind, that order saves arguments, that food is policy, that air has opinions, that small repairs are declarations of peace. It trains the eye for proportion, the right cup for the right thirst, the right word for the right wound, and the hand for gentleness sturdy enough to be trusted. A city that worships marble, survives on mortar no one praises. Step into the courtyard before dawn and listen. The tap of a jug on stone, the soft complaint of a door, a broom introducing itself to the day, these are the sounds of government at the scale that matters most. Somewhere beyond the wall, men are about to argue about ships and taxes. Somewhere below, in the dark, boys in the mines will meet the day before the sun does. The house lifts its latch, and the first pair of hands goes out to meet work that doesn't fit on a coin or a decree, but pays in something more stubborn. The kind of strength that will soon be asked to carry other people's names. Begin with a cradle that is really a syllabus. A nurse rocks, a lullaby keeps meter like a marching lyric, and a red thread circles a wrist because grandmothers know epidemiology before doctors get famous for it. On the 7th or 10th day, households argue like scholars. The amphidromia lifts the infant and trots him around the hearth so the house can memorize his name. The air smells of smoke and olive oil, which is to say of civilization in its portable form. Someone whispers a wish that sounds suspiciously like curriculum, health, sense, friends, and a voice that knows when to speak. Early toys are lessons with plausible deniability. A knucklebone teaches probability, a spinning top teaches persistence. A doll teaches logistics, clothing, shelter, diplomacy with hair. Boys chase hoops through alleys and learn momentum by shin. Girls braid by the door and learn patience that later pays like interest. Poorer homes improvise from wood and cleverness. Richer ones outsource from craftsmen with opinions. Everybody learns that a dropped honey cake becomes archaeology. At 7, school begins because the city likes to see children before they turn into lawsuits. A pedagogue, a household slave with authority and sandals that never miss a stone, escorts the boy to 3 masters, the grammatists for letters, the kitharists for music, and the pedotribes for the body's punctuation. Wax tablets are the first textbooks, a board with a shallow tray of wax that takes a reed stylus the way memory takes a morning. Mistakes are erased with a smoothing thumb. Bad habits are not. Ink and papyrus arrive later like house guests who cost more than they confess. Letters do not stay tidy in black and white. They come with a choir. A line of Homer is copy, chant, and cardio for the lungs. The teacher beats time with a stick that sometimes forgets its metaphor. Spelling is taught by baiting. How many sigmas has your soul today? Reading advances from syllable to scandal. Rare scrolls borrowed and returned with anxious care. Public inscriptions sounded out at the fountain where democracy posts its homework. The boy learns that stones speak slowly but surely. Numbers arrive with pebbles, calculi, poured from a little sack that feels like a future accountant. Columns of fives and tens build into drachmas and obols, measures and weights, the arithmetic of market arguments and jury pay. A good teacher uses olives when pebbles get boring, and then the lesson becomes edible. Fractions are taught with bread. Everybody listens closely. Somewhere a mother quietly proves she can multiply by managing a pantry that outwits months. Music is not decoration, it is alignment. The kithara, larger than the lyre and more expensive than your patience, rests against a rib cage and teaches posture like a philosophy professor who cares about tendons. Modes, tune mood. Dorian for steadiness, Phrygian for what the neighbors warned you about. Boys sing paeans to Apollo and discover that breath control is ethics in disguise. To keep rhythm, they clap, first badly, then less so. And it turns out the difference between good clapping and bad clapping is also the difference between good rowing and bad rowing. Athens insists these are one subject. In the Palestra, the Pitatribes teaches fall before flight. Sand is the most honest textbook. It records every mistake, then politely shifts for the next try. Halteres, hand weights, make jumps truer. The strigil makes hygiene non-negotiable. There is laughter because humility is cheaper than medical bills. The boy learns that courage means come back tomorrow, not win today. A scraped knee negotiates with vinegar. A scraped pride negotiates with jokes. Both usually heal. Girls' schooling lives indoors, but not in silence. They learn letters enough to run a household ledger and read a prayer without borrowing a priest. They learn to spin and weave, which is the economics of continuity disguised as art. To manage servants, which is the politics of small spaces. To price olives, which is statistics with better snacks. A few, rare in Athens but real, learn more. Music, medicine, even poetry, because households are practical rebels and talent is difficult to refuse. Cynics say women are inside. Household walls are not mutes. They are amplifiers pointed at the city. Adolescence arrives with voice and problem sets. The boy discovers rhetoric, which is carpentry for opinions. He pays a sophist if the family can afford charisma with footnotes. Lessons include invention, find something to say. Arrangement, put the furniture where nobody trips. Style, lace the speech without tying knots. Memory, hang arguments on mental pegs. And delivery, mouth, hands, and the art of not looking like you're being chased by your own sentences. Fees are steep. Talent is steeper. The Agora provides internships every morning. Books exist, but not enough to ruin anyone's eyesight. The book trade clusters near the Hermes statues, where scribes copy scrolls with a speed that terrifies accuracy. A good hand is a resume. A bad hand is a tragedy with ink stains. Libraries are private, portable, and aspirational. A shelf of Euripides, a Herodotus for rainy days, a medical scroll your cousin swears by, a pamphlet someone wrote against pamphlets. Reading is social. Someone always leans in and corrects your meter. At 18, the ephebic oath turns boys into civic furniture. They swear to defend sacred and profane alike, to obey magistrates, to leave the city better, an impossible clause charmingly retained, and to hand on the fatherland not less, but greater. They learn border geography by walking it, weaponry by carrying it, and boredom by guard duty under a sky that insists on being beautiful when duty insists on being dull. The oath is a syllabus of belonging, graded by weather and patience. Hygiene sneaks into education as policy. Schools share benches, styluses, and coughs. Smart masters post a basin, enforce rinsing, ban the communal sponge from the latrine like a prophet with good timing. Lice inspections happen with a comb, daylight, and the kind of humor that prevents rebellion. Vinegar is dispensary and metaphor. If someone arrives glossy from the gymnasium, the pedagogue directs him to the towel first, then the alphabet. Civilization has layers. Discipline is rhythm, not terror. Birch rods exist, so do teachers with a gift for glances that adjust posture at 30 paces. The best masters reward with errands to the bookstall, with the honor of reading an inscription aloud, with a seat near the window where breeze and curiosity are more persuasive than fear. A boy learns the difference between shame, loud, contagious, and conscience, quiet, durable. You can almost hear the city saving on future lawsuits. Education is not all benches. The theater teaches grief with chorus and correction with punchline. The agora teaches accents, interest rates, and how to spot a liar by the way he promises delivery. Processions teach memory carried in baskets. Sacrifices teach logistics. Law courts teach time management via water clock. A clever mother will stand a child under a decree and make him sound it out. A clever father will overpay by an obol and let the child spot the error because discovery tastes better than lecture. Illness edits the syllabus. In plague years, the school thins, teachers become triage nurses, and a boy learns that knowledge worth keeping must fit in the head and travel light. He memorizes proverbs that later sound like laws. Boil the water, open the window, tell the truth before it gets expensive. A girl learns to calculate grain to households, not mouths, because panic does fractions badly. The city learns to write instructions in stone where fear can't smudge them. And then there is the informal doctorate, apprenticeship. A boy stands behind a potter and learns centering by shoulder, behind a shipwright and learns the grammar of curves, behind a barber and learns that hands, once clean, become a promise. A girl shadows a midwife and learns the physics of breath, shadows a market woman and learns that reputation is interest compounded hourly. Nobody calls this higher education, but the city keeps standing because these degrees are awarded with knives and invoices. One evening, a teenager exits the theater quoting a line about justice as if it were a new pair of sandals. Stiff, but handsome. He passes a sculptor's yard where marble becomes anatomy by subtraction. He passes a stoa where a man asks questions until certainty develops a rash. He passes the fountain where women trade recipes and policy. He stops at a stele and reads a law out loud, stumbling only where the stone has weathered. Behind him, his pedagogue, old now and smug, says nothing. The boy puts a hand on the cool inscription as if the words had a pulse. Somewhere a door opens. The smell of dinner edits his philosophy into appetite, and he walks toward a room where the next curriculum, clay cups, clean hands, measured wine, has been laid out with a competence that could teach any school how to last. Begin with a door that opens too quietly. A woman carries a basin through the courtyard at dawn, the water lapping like small, stubborn time. On a couch inside, a body has been washed with olive oil and warm water, limbs straightened, jaw tied with a cloth, so the mouth remembers how to be closed. Coins wait near the head, 2 obols if the house can manage it. Payment not for miracle, but for administration. Karen's fee across the strip of black no city can tax. Someone sprinkles barley at the threshold because the living still have floors to negotiate. Someone drapes the lintel with a strip of wool because grief likes to bump its head. Death in Athens is choreography that refuses to apologize for being practical. The prothesis, the laying out, lasts a day. Face uncovered, hands crossed, the house rearranged so neighbors can enter and leave without bumping into sorrow. Friends come to touch the feet because the last honest act is to make sure the journey starts with warm hands, even if the feet are already cold. Tears do the useful work of rinsing astonishment. Laments do the inventory. He was kind. He was troublesome. He owed me 3 obols and a joke. The city has rules about how loud you may remember, sumptuary laws to keep grief from bankrupting the living, and a neighbor who enforces them kindly by taking the wailing aunt for a walk. At first light, the ekphora, the carrying out, sets the street in motion. Men shoulder the beer. The root walks through the hour when bread is being baked so the smell reminds everyone that the world continues, impertinent and necessary. Children are shushed and then ignored. They watch, they learn, they will repeat. A flute leads because breath should lead. The procession keeps a pace that understands both dignity and ankles. If the dead is poor, the city still gives distance. If the dead is rich, the city still expects restraint. Solon's old laws hover like sensible elders. Don't tear clothes into drama. Don't hire grief for export. Don't turn a person into a festival. The Kerameikos welcomes the cortege the way a coastline welcomes a tide. It has done this before and will again. Tombs line the road with carved restraint. Stelae of husbands shaking hands with wives, parents touching children with a touch that looks like an argument against time. White ground lekithoi, slender oil vessels, show farewell scenes in the quietest colors. A woman picking up a thread, a youth with a spear that will never again be needed by him. Oil is poured because bodies like courtesy even when they can't feel it, and because smell argues with despair better than speeches do. Burial and cremation both happen. Each claims to be older than the other, and neither is wrong enough to bother correcting. In plague years, fire wins because it ends questions quickly. In kinder years, earth gets to keep its habit of remembering. The grave goods are modest, unless the family has more money than judgment. A cup, a strigil, a toy, a little mirror, nothing the dead can use, and everything the living can point to when they need a narrative. The earth closes with the same sound it has for barley and secrets. Someone says a prayer that is also an instruction. Go where the good go, travel light. Send word if the gods are more bureaucratic than advertised. Afterward, the perideipnon, the meal, sits the household back down at a table that looks exactly like yesterday's and therefore like salvation. Fish, bread, olives, wine mixed a little weaker so tongues don't decide to be brave on a day when bravery means washing bowls. A portion is set aside for the dead. The dog gets it later because compassion likes practical allies. Stories arrive, and soon you can hear the birth of myth from the obstetrics of memory. He once, she always, remember the time. In the city, immortality is mostly a chorus of people agreeing that your best self was not an accident. Public death has its own grammar. When soldiers fall, the city gathers by the road and sets up the cypress coffins according to tribe. An empty bier for the missing who are somewhere between winds. The epitaphio's logos, funeral oration, climbs a platform and speaks in a voice designed to chase despair to the back row. It praises the dead without lying, praises the city a little more than necessary, and charges the living with the bill of memory. If the speaker is good, mothers leave less alone than they arrived. If he is very good, boys walk home taller and quieter, which is the golden mean of rhetoric in a place that actually keeps lists of ships. Beliefs about afterlife behave like well-bred rumors, persistent, adaptable, fond of detail. Hermes Psychopompos, polite as always, escorts souls down the road that never needs repairs. Hades is not a villain, but a landlord. Persephone manages seasons and traffic. Most people expect the Asphodel Meadows, neither punishment nor luxury, just long afternoons with your own character, which is why improving it now seems efficient. Mysteries whisper of better addresses if your passwords are in order. Orphic leaves, thin as a fingernail, promise a map in hexameters to those who planned ahead and knew a goldsmith. Miasma, the ritual pollution of death, keeps households cautious. Water runs over hands before they re-enter the daily. Laurel fumigates corners. A small piglet may be sacrificed to persuade the invisible to mind its own boundary. This is not superstition, so much as choreography for grief, time in which you are not asked to be efficient, space in which you are allowed to be peculiar. The city, which loves rules more than it admits, understands that cleaning after sorrow is a way of surviving sorrow without letting it recruit you. Art does consolations at scale. A sculptor in a workshop down the road carves a stele that shows a woman handing a bird to a child who looks up as if scales and laws were permanently negotiable. He sands the marble so it remembers skin. He polishes until afternoon. Light learns new behavior on it. He knows the face will teach strangers for decades to be tender. He signs nothing. The barber passes, tips his head, and recognizes both of his professions, making faces legible and teaching them where not to cut. Disease edits funerals the way a storm edits a calendar. In the years when coughs travel faster than messengers, processions shorten, meals shrink, fires multiply, and law gets stricter about where bodies may not be. Priests smoke sanctuaries with time and hope. Doctors mutter about air and distance and turn hope into instructions. People remember that grief is contagious if you let it become spectacle, and that mercy also spreads if you give it a cup and a corner. The dead receive economy. The living receive discipline. The city receives fewer ghosts to trip over next winter. The humble technology of memory is paperwork with soul. Names are cut into stone, dates whispered into ledgers, debts forgiven with a remark that sounds casual and is actually sacred. Mothers teach children to touch a stele with the same reverence they use for the first ripe fig. Fathers point at a relief and say, "Look how he holds the dog," which is to say, look how a person can be remembered without the part where he shouted. Memory selects. That is its cruelty and its kindness. Not all endings behave. A man dies in debt, and the family renegotiates with exhaustion. A woman dies in childbirth, and everyone suddenly becomes religious about midwives and vinegar. A slave dies, and the house becomes audience to its own conscience. Grief is class blind in the first hour and class aware in the second. The third hour invents compromise. A good neighbor moves a bench, brings water, and instructs gossip to take the day off. This is how a city keeps itself from becoming a museum of unfinished sentences. And then the city, having buried, does the strangest thing. It begins to live as if not immortal but competent. Doors are undraped. The broom returns to its post like a polite soldier. The basin is scoured as if water could learn from example. We do the small cleansings not to outwit death, but to demoralize it. You may visit, but you will not get sticky fingers on our cups. Somewhere a law is about to be argued. Somewhere a chorus is about to rehearse. Somewhere a baker is about to lean a wooden peel into a mouth of fire that prefers obedience to lamentation. The living step back into lines that hold. On the way home from the Keramikos, a boy reads an epitaph out loud, stumbling on one letter that rain softened into modesty. His father doesn't correct him. He lets the misread word float a step or two and then says, "You'll get it right next time." Well, they pass a pillar that once held a decree. They pass a house with a draped door where the basin is waiting. They pass a stoa where a speaker warms his voice with justice. The boy straightens the strip of wool the wind has tugged loose, a courtesy to the invisible, and turns his head toward the square where arguments make themselves clean or dirty, depending on who holds the floor. A turn of the face that, without warning, becomes the city's next manner of looking. Begin with a small, round promise that has an owl on it. Athens speaks many languages, stone, chorus, vinegar, but money is the dialect even foreigners pronounce correctly. A silver drachma winks in a palm and somehow contains timber from Thrace, sweat from the Laurian mines, the rumor of grain ships, and a quiet threat to anyone who thinks weights are a creative art. Flip it, and you get the goddess. Keep flipping, and you learn the city's favorite theology, faith backed by metal. Coins are not born, they are argued into existence. In a mint that smells like fire-making decisions, men melt, pour, and strike. Silver runs in channels like domesticated lightning, then cools into discs that wait for the hammer's verdict. The die shows Athena's profile in the owl's night school gaze. The blow is both sculpture and policy. A good strike rings clear. A bad strike rings like a rumor. Someone tests the edge with a knife. Filed coins are a vice older than shame. And if the weight is shy of the law, the piece returns to the furnace for an ethical education. The owl travels. In Piraeus, a Phoenician counts Athenian coin as if tallying weather. In Egypt, it buys grain that will keep philosophers from becoming cautionary tales. In a Cycladic harbor, it settles a tab that was negotiating in 4 languages and many gestures. Foreign money circulates too. Dolphins, bulls, lions. But the owl's habit of buying things without drama gives it seniority. Exchange tables in the agora rattle like good laughter. A money changer lifts a coin to the light, nods, and adjusts his rate by a hair. That hair buys a fig for his son and a law against counterfeiting for you. Prices are moral weather reports. Barley climbs when ships are late. Fish sulks when storms lie offshore. Olive oil keeps a steady pride because trees are calendar-length optimists. The agoranomoi test measures until they squeal. A short loaf costs a baker a lecture and a fine that tastes like embarrassment. On festival weeks, prices forget manners and then remember them, once inspectors start strolling with the calm of men whose tablets are longer than your excuses. The market never really sleeps. It only rehearses tomorrow, and tomorrow has opinions about weights. Credit is trust that has learned spelling. Bankers in shaded stoas keep tablets and tempers. They lend to captains and craftsmen, and occasionally to cousins against their better judgment. Bottomry loans pledge ship and cargo to Poseidon's moods. Interest rates rise when seagulls act ominous. Deposits accumulate from men who would prefer to keep their coins somewhere. Theft must fill out a form. Handshakes close deals, but witnesses make them legal, and vinegar-cleaned styluses sign the day into memory. If you want to watch civilization hold its breath, observe the room the second a messenger walks in from a storm and says, "The convoy is late." Public finances, theater with ledgers. Tribute from allies arrives like praise with a receipt. Liturgies draft the rich into patriotic generosity. Icephorai, property levies, happen when history wants new shoes. A citizen protests he is poorer than his rival, and the rival proposes antidosis. Swap estates and let poverty keep its promises. Suddenly, truth becomes brisk. The state pays for jurors, rowers, and stone carvers' lunches because justice, fleets, and pediments develop allergies to hunger. Decrees are carved in stone so that budgets cannot blush later. Payday smells like olive oil and relief. In the dockyards, coin runs down a bench like a silver river. One for you, one for you, one for the man who thought he was only rowing but was actually moving the map. In the theater, a chorus receives wages for sore calves and the public cleansing that laughter performs. On the Knicks, assembly attendance gets a small token so the poor can afford to care in person. Cynics call it bribery. Realists call it access. The city calls it cheaper than chaos. Contracts are a literature of trust that pretends to be boring. A scribe writes in a hand so neat even an enemy must respect it. Witnesses lean in. Seals are pressed into wax that smells faintly of bees and law. The clause that matters is almost always the one about delivery. Who carries risk from ship to shore, from door to table, from now to harvest? The boring part is the point. Drama belongs on stage. Ledgers exist to make sure comedy doesn't happen where bread is concerned. Behind the money sits the mine, and behind the mine sits a cost the city prefers to acknowledge quickly and then talk about ships. In Lorien, tunnels inhale boys and exhale silver. Lamps nibble oxygen, water is rumor, air is a tax. The machinery is bone, the technology is patience, the margin of error is a cough. Athens funds marble and philosophy with these dark sentences. When the owl shines, it throws a shadow. The honest thing to do is stand a moment in both. Inflation appears like a bad neighbor, suddenly familiar and always too loud. War eats coin, plague eats labor. Both teach prices, new tricks. The city responds with stricter measures, more inspections, emergency grain, and a fresh code of honesty on the market scales. A counterfeit ring is marched to the penalty post, necks and iron collars that say, "We tried to teach you with fines." Children pass and memorize 2 lessons at once. That fraud has a face, and that public shame is a sanitation device. Trade routes are circulatory systems with opinions about hygiene. Amphorae are stamped, sealed, and stacked according to a logic that saves backs and tempers. Oil turns rancid if stored where the sun can gossip with it. Wine travels better when the resin is not ambitious. Grain requires cool, dry, and a cat that minds its job. A single lazy storeroom becomes a citywide lecture. Ask a shipwright how to keep wood from rot, and you will get a sermon on air and time that doubles as a recipe for politics. Gifts and bribery share a wardrobe. A general receives a cup too heavy for drinking and too thin for innocence. A magistrate is offered a loan at a rate that sounds like friendship and smells like policy. Laws try to distinguish gratitude from purchase. Comedy helps by naming names more efficiently than courts. The safest gift is one the city shares. Public fountains, a festival, a new stair that barefoot knees will thank in summer. Private luxuries are nice. Public infrastructure is immortal. Philanthropy has receipts that look like altars. A man funds a fountain and pretends the city did it. The city pretends he didn't need applause. Both lie charmingly, and everyone drinks. A woman donates linen to the Asclepieian, and her name circulates like a remedy. The most quietly effective donor is still the one who invents a better broom and convinces the market to use it. We remember statues. We live longer because of drains. Money touches the body more than most religions do. Coins carry hands, hands carry mouths, and suddenly a city invents the habit of rinsing after counting. A banker boils cups between clients and calls it prudence. A fishmonger washes his scale with vinegar and calls it survival. A judge refuses a bribe and calls it sleep. Hygiene and ethics share a sink. Rinse, dry, repeat. And because all this arithmetic hums under the louder music of the day, it reformats desire quietly. A boy sees the owl on a coin and wants the story behind it. A girl counts olives into a jar and learns that wealth is the distance between enough and tomorrow. A shopkeeper adjusts a price a half a bowl down for a widow and discovers that reputation is interest compounded annually. Someone forgives a debt the week a fever runs through a house, and the city becomes a little less brittle. At dusk, the money changers stack coins into towers that would be religious if they were less honest. The last amphora of oil is signed into a ledger with a flourish only the scribe appreciates. The mint cools, the die sleeps, the furnace forgets it was a dragon. An owl lands somewhere ordinary, a roof tile, a lintel, and blinks like a book that closes itself. Down the hill, men lace sandals for a meeting. Up the hill, the Nix waits with its stubborn stones and its capacity for difficult arithmetic spoken out loud. The hands that counted will soon rise to be counted, and somewhere behind the numbers, a quieter ledger waits to be balanced, the one that keeps track of what a city owes the people who will carry it into tomorrow without dropping it. Begin at dusk, when marble pretends to be warm and the city smells like bread, deciding to be memory. From the Acropolis, the streets look like veins you could hum through. Down below, a woman blows out a lamp, a boy rinses a cup, a man brushes the day off his sandals with the tenderness of a small apology. Glory has an evening routine here. It does not strut, it tidies. If posterity wants heroism, it can keep the statues. What the city keeps is the broom. Ruins do not think they are ruins. A column only learns. It is famous when someone sketches it with affectionate accuracy. The stones remember hands before names. Quarrymen who cut straight because winter was impatient. Masons who set by plumb and hunch. Slaves who carried more than anyone admitted. Citizens who argued under shade that didn't exist yet. Inscriptions act like disciplined ghosts. Quiet until you ask, then suddenly chatty. Decrees, treaties, taxes, jokes smuggled into margins. The lettering is a civic pulse you can still touch. If a line is chipped away, it feels less like loss than like editing. Perfection was never the point, legibility was. Glory looks expensive on the hill, but most of the invoice lives at street level. A city that carves Athena in marble also carves fair weights in law. The theater teaches people not to faint when truth arrives in costume. The court teaches them not to faint when the mask comes off. The gymnasium tricks men into moral philosophy by training their ankles. The harbor convinces strangers to trust coins with owls, then convinces the coins to come back with grain. None of this is glamorous in the moment. It's repetition with jokes, rituals, habits, checklists that stop infection faster than prayers alone. If that sounds unromantic, remember who outlives whom, melodrama or vinegar. Fame, meanwhile, is a sloppy archivist. The world keeps Sophocles and misplaces the woman who boiled the water the year the cough was industrious. It praises Pericles and skim-reads the legislation about drains. It cites Plato and forgets the clerk who timed the speeches so the assembly couldn't turn into a hostage situation. We inherit a bookshelf and a floor plan. We pretend the former built the latter. The insult to intelligence is accidental. The correction is simple. Read the marble? Yes, but also the cinders in a hearth that did not burn a house down. Disease has better publicists than drains, but worse ethics. It arrives in clusters, on ships, in tight rooms, in the old habit of borrowing a sponge that should never have been communal. It tests the city's choreography. Do people keep space when they must? Do doors open to air? Do cups rotate, knives rinse, towels belong to one body at a time? Glory is a chorus, infection is a soloist. The result depends on whether rhythm beats ego. The surprise is that laughter helps. A joke makes people breathe, and breathing in order is the ancestor of policy. What survives best are proportions. The crater of mixed wine is a constitution you can drink, restraint with hospitality, caution with joy, water with something that persuades it to behave. The balance shows up everywhere once you look. a water clock that makes justice audible, a claritarian that makes office allergic to ownership, a festival calendar that makes piety a schedule instead of a mood. Somewhere between the chorus and the ledger, the city discovered an engineering principle for souls. If you give people enough rhythm, they will carry each other. Artifacts mutter instructions if you hold them correctly. A strigil says, remove what the day added, but you don't need. A coin says, back your promises with something more stubborn than charm. A loom says, complexity becomes strength when crossed at right angles. A funerary stele says, tenderness is a civic virtue. A market scale says, accuracy is love in public. Even the penalty post has advice. If shame prevents rot, use it. If it only performs cruelty, retire it faster than your pride prefers. Listen, too, to the spaces between things. The silence after a verdict that both sides accept. The pause before a speech, when a boy's courage steps onto the bema ahead of his voice. The stillness in a courtyard just after sweeping, when light tries the floor and approves. The lull in the harbor when the last amphora is counted and the sea briefly agrees with arithmetic. These are not metaphors. They are maintenance. Civilization is the art of keeping rooms where better choices happen by default. The myth says Athens loved beauty first. The stones say it loved process. Beauty is what you saw from the road. Process is why the roof didn't fall on you at dinner. Beauty is the peplos on the goddess. Process is the women who mapped a city into cloth. Beauty is the line in Euripides that glows. Process is the fixed price of bread when the convoy is late. The lesson is rude and useful. Glory is a byproduct of competence plus time. And yet, the city remains sentimental about failure. It builds theaters big enough to forgive the audience. It allows lawsuits that overturn yesterday's applause. It exiles men with too much chatto, then invites them back, pretending not to hold grudges. Actually, not to hold grudges. It honors the dead by carving names in a stone that weather will abridge, then keeps reading the stone anyway. It is a system for converting mistakes into features. When the conversion fails, you get history's headlines. When it succeeds, you get routines nobody credits until they stop. Curious, isn't it? How the smallest technologies carry the largest futures? A broom handles plague better than a prayer if wielded early enough. A locked lid out argues a rat more gently than a curse. A rinsed cup outvotes a rumor. The people who saved more lives than generals are anonymous because their timing wasn't dramatic. Their monuments are mornings that didn't become stories. Legacy finally shrinks to scale. Not empire, not marble, not perfect sentences on the perfect subject in the perfectly wrong weather. A well that stays sweet. A bench placed in shade where an old man can sit without bribing his knees. A law carved in a place even idiots consult. A habit of mixing, of airing, of labeling the jar because tomorrow's you deserves the courtesy. If glory is what the world applauds, then legacy is the equipment checklist that keeps the world available for applause. So here's a final inventory disguised as an evening walk. The owl in your pocket, proving promises. The broom by your door, declaring borders. The cup rinsed, refusing yesterday's biography. The lamp trimmed, choosing how much night to invite. The basin set out, because hands argue with fate all day and need persuading. The window opened, because air has better ideas than you. The threshold swept, because welcome is a policy before it is a feeling. The habit repeated, because habits are how cities remember what speeches forget. Down the street, a water clock begins its delicate scolding, measuring arguments into cents. Somewhere a chorus warms up, planning to wash a crowd with sound. Somewhere a doctor boils a knife that will later look like mercy. Somewhere a woman knots thread and a law into the same morning. The city breathes, and the breath smells faintly of oil and ash and bread and plans. And if you stand on the hill where heroes pretend to live and listen very hard, you might hear the oldest sentence Athens ever said to itself. Keep mixing. Ideas with limits, courage with caution, pride with invoices, wine with water, glory with chores. Keep mixing until the cup behaves, the street behaves, the law behaves, and the body remembers how not to invite the wrong guests. The lamp goes low, the basin cools, the coin winks, and the stones wait. Calm, practiced, ready for the next pair of hands, to decide whether the day will be famous or simply good enough to deserve being repeated.